You strong.
The year is 2026 in Seoul, South Korea. Today was just supposed to be another day, with every person lost in their own world, mindlessly going from point A to point B. An ordinary day that was no different from any other day before. People were so naïve and held the notion that the peace they thought they had would last forever. But even the remote idea of peace would be put to the test one fateful day. The day normalcy was shattered because of the appearance of what people now call dungeons. At that point in time, no human had any idea of what they were seeing, what was about to happen, and how different their lives would be from now on. The most apparent and terrifying rift in space appeared in the middle of a crowded city where the population and foot traffic were at its peak. It just came out of nowhere. A historically altering event that changed the course of humanity's trajectory. What came out of the dimensional rifts were monsters beyond human comprehension at that time. Muscular bodies, demonic horns, and eyes exploding with aggression. A countless number of monsters poured out of that dungeon. They did not waste a single second and immediately went after the people on the streets for some ungodly reasons. That was the day forces out of this world cornered humanity in fear. In a state of frenzied panic, the situation quickly devolved to a scenario where every man or woman was just thinking for themselves. Without the help of fellow humans, anyone would just be sitting ducks against this new fearsome force that just tore the fabric of space in the middle of a random street on a random day. The orc-like muscular monster raised its battle axe with vitriol, aiming for the poor woman who just happened to trip and fall. But it's not like everything was bleak and hopeless at this bizarre point in time. What came with the despair of the unknown horrors was hope from within. The merciless monster was swallowed by a bright light as a clean swing from a magical sword of a heroic figure took the beast down. They are humanity's hope in this world where every second of your life is under threat from unknown forces. The entities called hunters provide aid through the subjugation of any foreign enemies that dare to encroach on humanity's space. Boasting different abilities and masteries, they are the world's first and final line of defense. To these hunters, killing monsters is not all altruism and charity. There are resources that appear when you kill whatever creature a dimensional rift spews out. So instead of threatening humanity's very existence, they manage to turn the emergence of other worlds to make humanity prosper even more. Equipped with power that defies common sense and the physical limitations of the old world, the world of the hunters began. As for our story's protagonist, well, he's not exactly in a good spot. Today he has to run this errand with the Hunter Association registration office where, just like every other bureaucratic office, you have to get a number and wait until your number is called up. The woman at the other side of the desk was looking at the details in his paperwork, and she could not believe that someone like our man could exist. He possesses the rare labor class. His name is Jiha, and you had better remember that. The office worker continued to inquire about any skills or traits that the man might have gotten through awakening. He just smiled as if this question had been asked about him 1,000 times now. Jiha gave a wry smile and an awkward little laugh as he admitted that he did not possess any skills or traits at all. The heart of the city is a sprawling metropolis of massive conglomerates and organizations. Within a quaint corner of this metropolitan area was a small business with a potion bottle for a logo. It is the Seoul Sector 7 Hunter store. A young lady and what looked to be her dad entered the store to see and possibly buy some of the wares. Jiha owns and manages this small hunter store business by himself. The dad was just looking to get some potions, but the young lady with him just smiled and pointed right at the owner. She came up to Jiha carelessly to ask if he really was that man who got the rare labor class. He's been asked this question many times, but it doesn't get any easier or less awkward to answer every time. The labor class is rare for reasons that are far from good. The young lady asked if it really is true that Jiha doesn't have any skills, essentially making it impossible for him to hunt. Customer dad just quickly gathered the potions they need and apologized for the young lady's straightforward words without reading the room. Jiha assured the man that it's okay. He has gotten quite used to this type of thing now. Besides, the young lady did not say anything wrong either. As he scans the potions on the counter, he admits that he really does lack any special skill. Unlike most people, he doesn't even hunt and just gathers resources at the back from time to time. The young lady was still fascinated by the fact that such a man exists in this world. The dad lectured the young lady to stop asking such awkward questions and wasting time. But she also has a point that there is nothing wrong with being a little curious, especially in such a bizarre case. Just out front in the service road, it looks like the full swing of the city's armed forces and law enforcement squads are being deployed to an area in need of urgent assistance. Watching this sight from the storefront's window, the young lady reckons that there must be like a rank 3 dungeon that just opened somewhere if the defense forces are bringing in the panzers. There are also ambulances mixed among them. It's best to avoid where these aids are going. Jiha watched as the customers bickered while watching the flow of endless forces going to a rank 3 dungeon. That already goes without saying, as these two customers do not even remotely have enough skill to entertain the thought of going to such a high-level dungeon. A few moments later, he respectfully sent the customers off in their own way. The two were still bickering non-stop. Jiha knows that there would be a lot of resources in a place like a rank 3 dungeon, abundant treasures that he will probably never get his hands on, as it's impossible for the armed forces to even contact him for it. It has been 5 years since he's been awakened out of nowhere. On that special day, he got a unique class called Laborer. But it's hardly anything to be happy with. Looking at his Grand Hunter profile, it is evident that he did not get any skills or traits. He could not even dream of going inside a dungeon with other hunters to kill monsters. His stats were the definition of normal. He had already grappled with that fact, but instead of feeling bad for himself, he decided to be at the rear of hunts. After a company or guild swiped a dungeon, Jiha would sneak in and pick up the leftovers, however much there is, and sell it for a profit. Well, nobody really recognizes the work he puts in. With that gig and owning the hunting store to peddle his wares, he makes a decent enough living to support his true passion, his love for reading old books, any old book that he could get his hands on. For Jiha, nothing beats cracking open an ancient account of the past, no matter what it is about. The little store does not get too busy in the middle of the day, so he gets plenty of time to peacefully read his old books. Today has been running quite long, though. So long to the point that he's starting to yawn and become sleepy. The difficulty of his chosen literature for today might also be playing a part. He's an enthusiast, but the green book is still giving him a hard time. His eyes glossed over the pages until he could not bear the weight of his eyelids anymore. It's nap time for Mr. Labor Class. He finally passed out on top of the book that he was trying to decipher. The open page that he stopped at had this massive illustration of what looks like a magical tree. Collecting and reading old books is quite a chore for some, but there is a non-zero chance that it could lead to something extraordinary. The page that Jiha paused at started emanating an energy full of vitality. That illustrious energy was quickly starting to converge on the realistic illustration. Jiha was in his study at the hunter store, peacefully taking a midday nap 1 second ago, only to get transported to a mysterious plane as a piece of leaf hits his forehead. When he finally gained consciousness, panic and countless questions immediately flooded inside his head. He was now sitting in the middle of a mysterious jungle. After composing himself, at least a little bit, he started racking his brain to find out where he was. There doesn't seem to be any apparent landmark that he could observe, as the whole forest is covered with foliage and an encroaching thick fog. He tried pinching himself as hard as he could, and the pain proved that this is definitely not a dream. Another possibility would be that he is under an illusion. So he just decided to at least just check on his status window. Everything was pretty much normal in his status window. There is nothing special, just a unique class and a whole bunch of numbers that scream mediocrity. Now that he had calmed down for a minute, he noticed another eerie trait that this weird forest has. For how big and rich in vegetation it is, Jiha cannot hear any animal sounds. It was dreadfully silent in the middle of these woods. He can't really make sense of anything visually too, since the fog throughout the area is so thick. What he can see clearly now with his limited vision are some twigs with a fruit that looks like it was hit by a storm. With his rich experience in handling ingredients for his shop, he has never seen any fruit that looks quite like the one he's looking at now. The status window system listed it down as a level 1 ether herb. It makes the ether consumption of all skills into 0 for 10 seconds when consumed. Jiha has never heard of a plant called ether herb before, but he just could not believe its description. That effect was just way too absurd. No matter how you spin it, 0 consumption of ether for 10 seconds is way too amazing for an herb. To put it into context, let's try to understand what ether is in this world. Awakened hunters need this ether no matter what in order to use a skill. It is somehow like a fuel that runs the mighty hunters. You must also take note that the amount of ether that's going to be used depends on the strength of the skill. That is what makes this mysterious herb so amazing. It basically gives you 10 seconds of unrestrained fighting window where anything goes. If Jiha could take at least some liquid from this herb, he would be able to study its effects closely. It is a shame that he didn't bring a bottle with him in this impromptu adventure to an unfamiliar place. While he was thinking of that wasted opportunity to learn more, he noticed something else not far from where the herbs were. There are lively leaves on a tree that seems to be wrecked by something unknown. It was a very unnatural sight. Those leaves might really die if he just leaves them like that. So in this unfamiliar land, he still decided to do the kind thing and help the leaves to survive. He transferred the fledgling plant where it could start establishing new and stronger roots, and even gave it a kickstart with splashes of water. It was a good thing that there was water nearby that he could use to increase the chances of keeping the plant alive. Ujiha's hands were full of dirt, and even just moving a tiny plant has tired him out, but the smile on his face is far from worn out. It was genuine. Out of nowhere, the system notified him that he has gained Plant Amiability Level 1 after obtaining Plant Friendly, a Level 1 skill. He also gained the Blessing of Someone, or something just marked as XX. Blessing of XX is a Level 1 trait. These notices came out of nowhere and shocked Ujiha to the bone. After 5 years of being nothing in the Awakening Department, he suddenly gained a skill and a trait in one go, when all he did was plant a twig back into the land. Little did he know that the tiny twig he helped had already started taking root on the ground below at an unprecedented level. It is safe to say that this is not your run-of-the-mill twig. The plant was digging deeper into the land, absorbing that lush and bright energy contained below. Ujiha watched as the old tree where he cut the twig off started dematerializing into thin air as its smaller piece develops into something special in a span of a few seconds. He would call what's happening in front of him impossible, but to see is to believe. Ujiha was stuck staring at the incredulous and magical moment until he was finally transported back to his office. The trees around him were replaced with his rich collection of old books. He was back to where he was supposed to be, and he had not even had the time to completely process what happened in those mysterious foggy woods. He reckons that it might just be a hyper-realistic dream. He was about to wipe the sleep away from his eyes, but he's still wrestling with the fact that it just felt too vivid to be called a dream. Ujiha felt a rough and cold sensation when he brought his hands in to wipe his eyes. There's dirt in his hands and clothes. This just further supported the idea that what he went through was not a dream after all. There is something about the ancient book that he's currently researching, something truly special. To think that his hands would be covered in dirt all over when he was just sleeping soundly in his office is an absurd thought. Of course, there is also the possibility that he may be unknowingly suffering from sleepwalking, but he was certain that the door was locked and there is no place with dirt around where he's sitting. Going by the logic of his first trip to the mysterious forest, he might just be able to go to that forest again if he falls asleep. When you have an idea and you want to see if it works, there's only one other thing to do. Test it out. The first chance that he could get, Ujiha did just that. By the looks of the converging energy in the middle of the woods, it looks as though it is a success. As expected, he was transported to the exact same place as earlier. It might take a little while to get used to, but at least he has established that this place is for real. It was the exact same place, but there are tiny changes here and there. Right now, it looks like it got wider than it did earlier. It seems like the fog has started clearing up a bit too. Going by what he knows, this might be a special dungeon that he could enter in his sleep. He has never heard nor read anything about such a place. As he was trying to take in as much information he could glean from the surroundings, he noticed something about the barren trees surrounding the twig that he tried reviving. Now, it looks like juicy golden fruit has sprouted. It is a level 1 solar apple. Its effect dictates that when combined with a health potion, the healing amount increases by 20%, and its duration decreases to 80%. Unlike the ether herb, Ujiha knows about these so-called solar apples. He knows that it's hard to find these things even in the deadly high-rank dungeons. The 20% boost in healing that it provides is way too good. As an owner of a small hunting shop, he knows that health potion is the most commonly used item in dungeons. But the over-the-counter healing potions available to the public are small in quantity and only heal a maximum of 10% of maximum health. With the solar apple's effect on top of 20% healing buff, it even quickens the process by a ton. On top of that, there isn't only 1, 2, or 3 of these rare treasures. The once barren trees, as far as the eye can see, were teeming with ripe solar apples waiting to be harvested. Ujiha's mind reeled. If he can take the solar apples and ether herbs out of this place, he thinks that he'll be able to make a potion with incredible effects. He still feels weird about it, but he tried to convince himself that it should be fine to take 1 or 2 out by putting them inside his clothes. Just as he was thinking about that, a sack pouch suddenly fell down from the sky, hitting him in the face. It was not an ordinary sack pouch at all. It is a valuable dimensional pouch that can store materials in a limited independent space. As he was observing the dimensional pouch and wondering if he can put things from the store in this thing, he noticed that there are already a few bottles stored inside. He was just thinking of how he could take a few of the treasures from this place, only for the sky to provide him with a solution. He could only laugh awkwardly at the scary thought of something listening to him from above. Anyways, he has gotten everything he needs. It's time to test and see if he can harvest the precious treasures in this place or not. The very next day, let's turn our story to the famous Hunter specialty chain store in District 7 of Seoul known as the Hunting Ground. Inside, customers have lined up early in the day to buy some hunting supplies. The store was so popular that the buyers are pushing each other around to get in front of the line. The hunter wearing heavy armor at the start of the line was furious to be notified that there were no more paralysis resistance potions left. While the attendants of the store tearfully apologized for the inconvenience as they had run out of stock, and it would take an hour for the refill. For the busy, high-profile hunters, this type of delay is nuts. Some had already ordered their assistants to contact other businesses since the time frame for entering dungeons is quite limited. But every big hunting supply business is also in a big time of shortage. While everyone was whining and complaining about how they will be late for their hunts, someone entered the room and all eyes turned to that person. Dark hair, beautiful place, top-tier armor, sharp disposition, and a fearsome blade. She is Seo Hyejin, also known as the Sword Witch. She skipped the long line of complaining customers and directly asked the attendant to please call the manager. No one dared to complain that she did not line up from the back. For some of them, this is their first time seeing a hunter of such degree as Seo Hyejin in person. She is dressed by rare class artifacts no lower than items looted from Tier 4 dungeons. The Sword Witch is 12th in the current hunter ranking, so it's understandable why she has top-notch gear. The manager has finally showed up to personally welcome the Sword Witch while stuttering. He had no idea that such a renowned figure in the hunting world would come to the store personally. But they have forced her hand because they've been dodging her calls about the potions that she ordered in advance. The manager apologized for having a lot of previous bookings, so the potions that Seo Hyejin needs are still unavailable at the moment. Someone of her stature could not afford to waste time waiting for potions, though. She is under time constraints right now. In 30 minutes, she will be challenging a dungeon. The Sword Witch just ignored the incompetent manager and pulled out her phone to check on nearby hunter shops. Even just general stores would be fine. In a small Sector 7 hunter store, Jiha has successfully harvested some ingredients from the mysterious forest to do some experiments. He used purified water, Undyne's tears, and ether herb liquid. That should be a pretty compact list. With the main potion brewed in just the right way, putting in the solar apple concentrate and mixing it a little bit should complete the experiment. As he was waiting and observing what the result would be, the system sent him another notification that due to XXX's blessing, a great success verdict has been applied to the concoction. He has also unlocked the first level of the sought-after skill of alchemy. The final product came out as a level 1 special potion. Upon use, all skill ether consumption becomes 0 for the next 14 seconds, while recovering 14% of maximum health in just a span of 15 seconds. Jiha already expected that the effects would be good, but not this good. Even self-proclaimed alchemists don't have the alchemy skill, so unlocking it in one experimentation run is quite a shock. As he mixes the solution around to observe how unbelievably pure it is, he could not help but wonder what in the world is the blessing of XX for him to get results that are this good. Before that, he has to think if it would be all right to sell this potion. He knows that the potion has an outstanding effect, but he doesn't know how much to charge for it. It could also be a hard sell to the customers as the description sounds too good to be true on paper. It would be reasonable to think that no one would believe him if he just casually listed off what this potion can do. So, he steeled his resolve to not sell the thing and check out its effects on himself first. At that exact same moment, the Sword Witch entered his humble hunting store. He wore his usual customer service smile and asked the elegantly armored woman how he could be of service with his experimental, special potion sitting at the counter. She moved as fast as lightning, going from the entrance to the counter in a split second while desperately asking for potions as she was running out of time. The Sword Witch finally noticed the fizzy concoction sitting on the counter begging to be taken. Seo Hyejin confirmed if the contents of the bottle was a health potion, and Jiha did say that it is, but before he could explain further, the Sword Witch chose to cut him off. When asked what the effects it has, he wanted to keep insisting the mixture is still not for sale. She heard all that and just apologized. She had no more time to discuss the specifics. So if it's a health potion and there's nothing wrong with it, she'll just take it anyway. The Sword Witch just threw a pile of cash on him and told Jiha to contact her guild in case the compensation was not enough while she takes her hurried leave. She came as fast as she went. She disappeared in an instant with the speed of a real top-ranked hunter. Jiha was still worried how this situation will turn out, but the Sword Witch should be fine, right? Let's see if that'll be the case. Let's follow the sword witch in her adventure inside a dungeon. It looks like today would be quite an easy excursion. She did not even pull her blade out and just casted a spell that produced swords made of energy to one-shot some monsters that dared to stand on her way. She deals with monsters as if these powerful creatures were just an afterthought and she's aiming for something else. Her other party members only serve as the designated looters for the fallen monsters that she did not have the time to carve for materials. As expected of the rank 12 hunter, the other two's job is nice and comfortable, but they still feel a little scummy. It's like they were being carried without having the chance to hone their own skills. The older looter has long since given up on working on his own game to not bother the sword witch. He's already accepted that his job is to quietly gather resources while she wreaks havoc. This older looter has been with the sword witch for a while now, and the old Seo Hyejin was different. She would let the lesser talented members participate in fights, but ever since one particular incident, she's changed to a complete solo play hunter. Newbies must not know about that incident since it's been a while. As the older looter was about to explain, they heard the sword witch's panicked voice telling them to run away. At first, they were not able to see the reason behind the urgency, but when they did, they looked frozen in fear. Standing up front, emanating a domineering aura, was a manstalker, an aversion-level monster the size of an armored car. It is not only physically imposing, it also uses extreme poison as a weapon. An aversion-level monster that only appears in grade 4 or higher dungeons shouldn't be in this place at all. Failure to escape would only mean certain death. The sword witch immediately rushed in with her blade spell while insisting once again that the two should run as far and fast as humanly possible. Her speed was no joke. Every step propels her deeper into the monster's strike zone, but she was rushing in with all of her magical blades primed and ready to stab the manstalker all at once. She finally took out her ultimate weapon, a massive great sword shining with blue light. The full-powered slash was easily blocked, though. The manstalker's nasty naked hand pincer turned out to be tougher than initially thought. It could actually contend with her great sword. With the body of a human, demon, scorpion hybrid, it excels in both speed and strength, making the manstalker a fitting name. In hopes of wounding the sword witch, the monster mowed down a decent chunk of the dungeon's forest. Even Seo Hyejin must admit that this creature might just be too damn strong for her. Just running away from those sharp attacks has worn her out considerably. Even her ether is almost completely consumed now. The only thing she could think about was that she only had enough in the tank to buy enough time for the others to run away. At times like this, she gets reminded of that incident that changed her. If her Seunghyuk Appa was here, things would be going a lot differently. But she must push on. She knows that Seunghyuk is not around anymore, that things must change, and she must rely on herself. She took the potion she hurriedly bought at some tiny general store in the city and popped its cork. Looking at its contents, she was determined to only believe in herself from now on. While she's at it, she might as well believe this odd potion too. Since it should be a low-level potion bought in a general store, she already prepared herself for the foulest taste that one can imagine. But to her surprise, the thing did not even taste nor felt awful. She emptied the entire flask in one sip without noticing. She confirmed that it is a potion, but it is oddly as delicious as a good beverage. Another thing that shocked her is that consuming the concoction made her feel like she was overflowing with infinite ether. With her combat experience, she became certain that this boost was massive. So massive that she won't have to just buy time, massive enough to turn the tables on the manstalker. So she's going for round 2 of taking the initiative to advance instead of retreating. The monster openly took her on, as if confident that it had come out on top. But this time it is different. The sword witch executed her ace in the hole. The technique is known as powerful sword rampage. In a split second, countless fine slashes with flawless precision rained down on the hideous monster without mercy. It was the ultimate technique in terms of power and speed. The manstalker's face got diced and its meat slid off of each other. She beat an unbeatable foe in its own game of speed and strength. She stood at the other side of the destruction that she just handed out and could not believe that she did all that. Seo Hyejin knows that this is all thanks to that potion. On top of health recovery, her ether consumption was essentially gone. Thanks to that, she was able to use powerful sword rampage for 10 seconds when her maximum limit was only supposed to be 3 seconds. If all of this is due to that potion that she just hurriedly picked up in some random shop, then this could be big. And the biggest question in her mind right now is what in the world is that little shop? What the hell is that kind and always smiling owner hiding? The next day arrived, and it was pretty much business as usual in the little Sector 7 Hunter store. That was until the customer bell hung in the door chimed its welcoming sound. Everyone in the store, including the owner Jiha, had their attention stolen by the person who just entered. The sword witch did not mince words, and it was as if the other customers in the shop did not even register in her vision as she made a beeline directly to the owner. She grabbed him by the shoulder as if afraid that the man would run away as she asked, "What the hell was that potion that you sold me?" Seo Hijin is a superstar. Virtually every hunter in the country, let alone in the city, knows who she is. Also, the news of her slaying a manstalker has already been so exaggerated that there are accounts saying she devastated a whole swarm. Now that she noticed that there are other people nearby, she tried to contain herself and apologized to Jiha for being rude. She insisted that there is a problem with the potion. The problem was that she had never seen a potion that can heal 14% max health and lift the cost of ether for skills altogether. Even the owner himself had already seen the uploaded clip. How she eliminating an aversion-ranked monster on her own in an amazing series of powerful moves. She kept on clarifying that it's not her that was impressive in that clip. It was the special potion. She just wants to know where Jiha got it from or if he brewed it himself. He was quite prepared to answer any questions regarding his special brew by just showing the secret ingredient that he used. The ripe golden solar apple. The story he decided to go with was that he luckily stumbled upon the solar apple in a Tier 0 dungeon. That detail was too hard to believe, though. Even the sword witch herself had to take a pause and seriously think if solar apples are that common to the point of spawning in the least dangerous dungeon. Jiha thinks that revealing the details about the forest could go wrong real quick, so he'll just make some excuses. Still, as the one who made it, he's genuinely happy that his potion helped the sword witch. She noticed something. As she looked around the limited space of the shop, she noticed another batch of interesting potions. The contents were blue this time around. She took one to inspect up close and asked him what the effects were. He casually explained that it gives 32% ice resistance that will last for 40 minutes. Hearing that description almost took Seo Hyejin out. She's a combat veteran, and she's certain that the best quality ice resistance potion in the market only gives 10% resistance and only lasts for 15 minutes max. This potion was miles better in every way possible. When asked where he found it, Jiha started searching for another excuse in his mind. In reality, he just harvested another type of plant growing in the mysterious forest. Level 1. Winter strawberries can already provide 20% ice resistance for 30 minutes on their own. He took some of it, just enough to brew a batch of experimental ice resistance potions. Jiha enjoys the process of brewing these potions with his alchemy skill in full display. He whipped up a whole batch and it made his alchemical skill jump to the second level. But when faced with questions about his methods, his go-to excuse was that he found it at the Tier 0 dungeon. The sword witch can see that this guy is just a bad liar. Seeing that he wants to keep his business secret, she won't pry anymore, seeing how uncomfortable the owner was. But she would like to buy all of these new ice resistance potions. She would even pay in cash. For a high-ranking hunter, bringing out a wad of paper is no big deal. She doesn't even need a receipt. He tried to say that this amount was way too much for just a few potions, but if you ask her, she knows that her cash is not even nearly enough for potions of this quality. Before going through the door, she finally asked him what his name was, and he just gave it with no fuss. Jiha. She likes it. Jiha has a nice ring in her ear. Before actually leaving the premises, the sword witch playfully told him that they'll see each other again next time. Back inside the mysterious forest, the place itself was starting to look better and better. He has been regularly harvesting glowstones, kindle gems. His winter strawberry basket is in need of refills after the sword witch's bulk buying, but he can just walk up and get some more. The glowstones and kindle gems were new finds for Jiha. There was just so many precious resources in this forest without the threat of any dangerous monsters. He's reaping the benefits, but even now, he still has no clue about what or where this place is. He had gotten so used to the tranquil silence of the greenery that a tiny sound of movement behind the foliage caught his attention. Jiha was put on high alert. He was certain that he did not hear that sound wrong. There is something lurking behind the bushes. Upon looking all over the place, he saw the source. Shock and curiosity was the chief emotions that he felt at that moment. He just happened upon a cute beetle-like creature with pincers in place of limbs. The system identified it as a pterodrone, a mythic monster that is as big as a small car. It resembles a beetle but sports its signature giant claws. He knows of the creature known as pterodrone. Mythic creatures are few and far between after all. Right now, he's not only seeing one, he's actually seeing several of them walking around. Contrary to their described size of being as big as a small car, these guys are tiny. Another bizarre thing was a transparent synthetic wall that he couldn't go past through in this part of the land. The pterodrones are grouping up and hastily heading for something. That something was a group of devil ants. They are hazard-ranked cargo truck-sized monsters. Killing one attracts 10 more of them, making them supremely difficult to deal with. The Terra drones were actually going up against some powerful foe for some unknown reason. Jiha could only watch from behind the synthetic barrier as he recalls reading something about devil ants from one of his old books before. They are true blue hazard ranked monsters, but the poison that they can emit makes them even more dangerous than some aversion ranked monsters. Throughout this whole ordeal, there is just one glaring issue. The system prompts kept on telling him that these creatures were all supposed to be gigantic. Looking at it now, they just look like tiny bugs that are engaging in increasingly intense combat. The Terra drones are in the back foot. They are being absolutely demolished by the devil ants. These adorable Terra drones are trying to pick a fight and are losing. Most of them aren't even really fighters. Jiha can only wonder what's making them do this. Seeing that the charming creatures were about to get steamrolled, he wanted to find a way to help them. As if the heavens heard his worries, a system prompt asking him if he wants to help his own Terra drone legion in this war appeared all of a sudden. This implies that he can directly intervene in something that he doesn't really fully understand. The prompt also says that these are his Terra drones, implying that the mythical creatures are under him. It's in Jiha's nature to feel inclined to press the yes button to help the Terra drones in this struggle. His legion is losing pretty hard right now, but he can use his essence to cast an area buff. There are 4 choices: increasing HP by 30% for an hour, increasing poison resistance by 40% for an hour, increasing physical resistance by 30% for an hour. These 3 costs 1 essence each. The last choice costs 2 essence, and it simply grants the laborer's blessing. Helping them directly would be impossible with the synthetic shield on the way, but giving assistance like these options is the next best thing. He currently has 2 essences on him right now. The 4th option was the more expensive one out of all the choices, so Jiha wanted to choose that one. As soon as he confirmed the bestowment of the laborer's blessing, it was as if every stat that the Terra drones possess was bolstered by divine intervention. They gained a much-needed physical augmentation and a valuable morale boost. It did not take too long before the devil ants were absolutely smoked quickly. The Terra drones turned the tables. They did not only turn it, but they also smashed it all over the ants' faces. These beetle boys actually minced these devils up so hard that they lost their creepy crawlers. Jiha celebrated on the sidelines, proud of his so-called legion for winning the war. He couldn't believe that he just saw some mythical creatures prevail over adversity with his help. He personally thanked the Terra drones for standing up to their principles and protecting the forest. As he was praising them for their good work, Jiha noticed that these little dudes are gathering something. They were offering up a whole lot of essence and ether stones. He smiled at the Terra drone legion's generosity and thanked them for thinking of him. Unfortunately, Terra drones didn't understand what he tried to say. In the end, he just took 5 essences and 5 essence stones each. He wanted to leave the rest of this precious resource for the little guys that actually fought with their lives on the line. This much is already good for him. At that moment, the transparent synthetic barrier slowly dissolved into nothing. Now that the wall is gone, the area of the mysterious forest accessible to him has increased drastically. Likewise, the fog has been lifted too. He initially planned to only stay for a bit and do some harvesting today, but it is starting to look like he won't be going back for a while now. Exploration takes precedence. After the appearance of dungeons and hunters, something special was established to connect all the hunters in the world. A community for hunters by hunters known as the Hunter Net was formally established. Right now, the discussions in the Hunter Net are centering all about one person and one video clip. Hunter Rank 12, the fierce sword witch, Seo Hyejin. Someone in a dark office is currently browsing the Hunter Net for information. She has long fiery red hair and a stalwart aura. But tonight she's on her anonymous account with a red avatar, arguing that there should be no dispute whatsoever with regards to the sword witch soloing the Manstalker. Another anonymous user with a blue avatar argued that there is also a case to be made about how it should be impossible for Hyejin to do something as incredulous as solo killing a Manstalker without any help. That really ticked off Red. You could almost sense how heated she immediately got just by hearing how fast her typing rate went up. Blue kept on arguing about the number of people entering the dungeon. Red brought up the fact that Hyejin has been a solo player ever since Han Seung-kyuk mysteriously disappeared. Red maintained a calmly stoic look on her face, but she's currently locked in. Blue replied that they honestly hope that the sword witch forgets about that Seung-kyuk guy, that she can't keep on missing someone that disappeared forever. That really pushed the wrong buttons in Red's mind. This stranger she's been anonymously arguing with can only talk smack like this because it's not their problem to carry. Red tried to explain that Hyejin's significant other disappeared in a dungeon, and she has every right to miss him as much and as long as she wants. Her calm demeanor has left the room at this point. Now she's just outrightly pissed. Blue made it even worse by replying that it has been 3 years since the incident, as if grieving has a cooldown timer. In those 3 years, all she did was go around one dungeon in hopes of finding him again. Red wanted to get her point across, but even anonymous Blue felt that it's not a good idea to talk about a missing person like this. Unless you're Seo Hyejin herself, at least. This stranger on the internet has crossed so many lines that Red just wanted to harm something. The dark room was suddenly lit up with bright office lights. A deep voice asked Red if she is a zombie for getting into the habit of browsing the net in darkness. An activity that is bad for your eyes, but even worse for your brain. The dignified guy that just came in is known as Choi Chul-hyun, the top alchemist of the Eternal Flame Guild. Red insists that she can just concentrate better when it's dark while stretching out after spending an ungodly amount of time surfing the web. Choi Chul-hyun is back to report something that he checked into in person. His assignment was the lowest rank hunter with no traits, Jiha that runs the hunter store. As expected, Chul-hyun did not feel anything special from the guy. Red was ready to dismiss the matter, concluding that Jiha has nothing to do with Seo Hyejin getting stronger at an unbelievable pace and degree. Chul-hyun was not done with the report yet. He inspected the wares and saw that the store was selling something special. Something that concerned solar apples. Even Red had a vague idea as to what those delicious golden treasures were. It is an item that drastically reduces ether usage, and even Eternal Flame Guild's top alchemist had never seen it in person. The thing was, Jiha brewed a potion out of such a valuable ingredient and was selling said potions at a very cheap price. Chul-hyun concluded that they can make two assumptions from this bizarre situation. One is that he doesn't know the real value of solar apples. Chul-hyun does not even have to say the next one. The second assumption made Red's clever smile appear. It might just be that the mysterious Jiha is a person without an ounce of greed. Since she needed some fresh air anyway, Red decided to check the store out personally and see this shop owner herself. Chul-hyun insisted on calling the car, but she refused. She's not a CEO or anything that flashy. Having a car driving her around feels too much. She might have a point that she's not exactly a CEO, but she's still in a similar position. Red is Chahua Yan, the Eternal Flame Guild master. Back in the mysterious forest, Jiha has made himself comfortable in the middle of all the greenery by making a small bonfire. The deeper he pushed into the forest, the colder it has gotten. It was a good thing that he brought his lighter. The wall and fog that blocked the inner forest have dissipated, and it opened up new possibilities. He looked around, but there wasn't much of a big difference from the first area that he came from. Of course, he was not able to explore the perimeter in full. He was blocked from proceeding any further by an ominous aura coming from a certain spot in the forest. That place just seems too dangerous. He can feel his flight or fight response get triggered near it. Jiha doesn't really want to put himself in danger for the sake of curiosity, so heading back for now seems to be the reasonable choice. Just as he was about to go up and leave, his legion of adorable pterodrones started meekly coming up to him. All of them had a worried look on their faces while carrying a mysterious plant seed each. These pterodrones have been carrying mist-chasing flower seeds all over the place to get rid of the fog. Apart from the ones from the Devil Ant War, Jiha can also see a new face, a shy pterodrone that is bigger than the rest. He seems a little different than the rest, so he might be their leader or representative. Now that he's seeing the bigger picture, it seems like these little guys just came out of the ominous place in the heart of the forest. Another system prompt popped right in front of Jiha. This time, it is a pterodrone request for the rescue of their queen. These creatures do have queens just like ants and bees. Then these mist-chasing flower seeds are like their offering before asking Jiha for a favor. He was moved by their current situation. Besides, these little guys have protected the forest thus far, so he promised to do what he can. Jiha admits that he's a little scared, but he'll lend a helping hand. He patted the big pterodrone on the head as he assured them that they will do the rescue operation tomorrow. For now, he has stuff that needs to be prepared. The next day came, and Jiha stood by his promise. He used the bountiful resources in this mysterious forest to brew another batch of healing potion, a batch of poison resistance potion, and bought a healthy portion of combat ration. Jiha poured all of these in their respective tiny bowls and let the pterodrones feast on them like a pregame for war. Now that basic preparations are done, adding an area buff like last time should make dealing with devil ants easy. Now that his legion is pumped up with feeds and brood boosters, their morale is sky high and their prowess higher when Jiha ordered them to fly forth. Like before, he was stuck in the back lines, and as expected, the source of that ominous feeling deep in the forest was something that the pterodrones were quite familiar with. It was a system of devil ant hives, the mother lode. This is the place where those pesky devil ants reside and prosper. For the first time in a while, there's something that matches that can intimidate him with size. Each one of these mountain of killer ants are at least 3 meters tall. When the pterodrones finally got close to the vicinity of the hives, they were welcomed by the full force of the devil ant security team. These monsters immediately pulled out one of their more lethal cards, the poison excretion from their bodies to the atmosphere. With the help of Jiha and ample preparations, it looks like the little guys are up for the challenge. The war between the Terradrones and the Devil Ants has finally begun. With their overall stats bolstered up to a new level, the beetle-like mythical beasts were making quick work of Devil Ant First Wave. It is a close fight overall, but the Terradrones are superior in sheer will. Thanks to the basic preparations that Jiha prepared, his legion is evidently doing a lot better than they did last time. But they can't all be outstanding fighters right from the get-go. They are still in danger under the enemy's home court. Jiha was then notified that he can assist his legion with his power, but it will be limited to a one-time use. The next prompt offered putting the devil ants with wings back on the ground with a strong slap. This would cost him 3 essences. He can give help a single time and it comes in the form of a slap. A one-use slap in a situation like this is way too ridiculous. He doesn't even know what he's supposed to do with this silly choice. The solution to his problem of using the slap has kindly presented itself on time. A winged devil ant came out of their lair. These specialized members of the hive act as the messenger of the colony with their ability to fly. The devil ant army is essentially trying to send a message to recall their main army back to the hive. Jiha now has the ability to stop these ants from sending a message with a single slap. He just said whatever and accepted the blessing from the system as he clenched his palm. The winged devil ant has started its urgent journey to call on the bulk of their army to end the war with Terradrones once and for all. It felt so confident that the flight would go on without a hitch. It forgot to check above for any anomalous figures looming around. Jiha brought down his hand like the might of a giant god and bitch slapped the clueless flying ant into smithereens. This is his one-time assistance to his Terradrone legion, killing ants in a classic style. Proper punishment for annoying ants. Taking a day out of her busy schedule, Cha Huayan decided to visit Jiha's store. After inspecting the building that sold sun apples up and down, she didn't notice anything supernatural. Externally, it was unremarkable and had nothing special. But you can't judge a book by its cover. No one knows what secrets might be stored inside. Seo Hyejin said that she defeated a stalker after shopping here, so Cha Huayan couldn't go by such information. Now she was even more eager to uncover the secrets of this place. She was in a great mood and had a huge pile of questions she wanted to ask the shopkeeper, but pulling the door handle, it was closed. After pulling a few more times, she made sure she wasn't imagining things and started looking around. It was odd that the sign hung with the open side, but maybe the owner had just stepped away for a while and needed to wait a bit. But that a bit could drag on for hours, so turning around to the old man who had originally cleaned the site, she asked about the store's hours of operation today. However, the man didn't know the exact time, even though it used to open on time and close late in the evening. Unfortunately, for the past few days, the potion store had changed its opening hours, and the owner had started opening the store less often. This time the doors were still closed from yesterday, so no one knew what the problem was. In the end, he said that young people were getting lazier every year, and then he turned his back and started cleaning in the other direction. This information was completely different from what Cha Huayan had received, as she had been told that they only didn't work on weekends. A glance at the wooden signboard displaying a potions vial convinced her of her speculation. Anyone hearing about the sudden change of opening hours would think of this person's evil intentions. As expected of Jiha, he is up to something. Meanwhile, our hero used the system's gifted opportunity to participate in the Terradrone battles and resented how little he could do. However, it should have been enough to bring them closer to victory, since this wasn't even his war. Besides, eliminating the messenger wasn't bad revenue for them either. Of course, the devil ants didn't like this turn of events, and their motivation was fading. Looking at the reinforced Terradrone, it was immediately clear what outcome the battle would have on them, because their armor had become stronger, and their strength appeared even more than originally. That was why when they attacked them, the ants fled, emptying the clearing. Sighing a sigh of relief, Jiha sat down on the ground and covered his eyes. This war was mentally exhausting for our hero. Meanwhile, the Terradrones began to run around him, happy that they had managed something. However, their queen was still inside the anthill, so she had to be taken out somehow. Remember the ray, here comes the sun. Turning his head towards the anthill, he wondered what was going on. The Terradrones had rescued her from there themselves. They had also somehow managed to make a stretcher. Their development was clearly at a high level, even without evolution. Raising her head up a little, the queen looked at her savior and began to express her gratitude. With the help of her subordinates, she managed to rise to her feet and bowed to Jiha for her rescue and the support of the entire settlement. He was naturally happy about it, but forcing a sick creature to bow was not his style, so he stroked her and told her that everything was fine and she could rest in peace. He was genuinely glad that she was unharmed. Looking at the situation from the outside, one could compare him to an angel descending from heaven. Nevertheless, the system window informed him that the Terradrone Queen wished to swear allegiance to him. If he signed the contract, he would sponsor her group and receive several items with the stipulation that Jiha would have to fulfill their requests. Fortunately, he wasn't going to think about her proposal and gladly accepted the Queen's offer. After notifying the loyalty of the Queen and her troops, the system notified that he could supply their squad directly. At the same moment, General Terradrone suddenly began to emit a bright light and absorb energy from the environment, changing his form. He managed to evolve thanks to the agreement he had signed, and his appearance changed a bit after that. Not only did its claws become larger and stronger, but also the chitinous shell that maintained the quality of its armor. Jiha watched the transformation, and with a smile on his face, he marveled at the fact that he was pumped up. Now the Terradrone general began to more closely match his name, standing out from the uniform surroundings of his congeners. After circling above our hero's head for a bit, he raised his large claw and signaled to the rest of the group to get ready. At the same moment, they started carrying golden essence ingots and ether stones without paying attention to Jiha's previous requests. After all, he had said that he didn't need so much. Examining the two large piles of consumables, he decided to only take 10 pieces each and leave the rest to the Terradrones. Besides, he already had something very valuable that the general had brought him before the battle. He took out 2 seeds of different colors from his pocket and examined them. The purple one was immediately clear that it was a wild grape, but the green one was more difficult. He couldn't immediately figure out what kind of fruit tree seed it was, so he left it for later. After getting up from the ground and shaking off his clothes, the protagonist decided that he would find out about it when it grew, and the forest would deal with the rest. Jiha began to appear in this forest too often, so after looking around, he settled on the fact that it was time to build a hut. The very next day, a new gate to the dungeon opened, which the people did not miss out on seeing. A group of hunters passed through the gate without delay, looking for bait. One of them asked Hennim if he was sure the Queen of the Ants was here. He wrinkled his nose a little and decided not to yell at the fool, but calmed down and replied that he wasn't crazy enough to go into the dungeon of the devil ants. Besides, if they managed to loot the anthill properly, then everyone from the squad could earn a decent amount of money as a reward. However, his interlocutor immediately stopped in place and pointed forward, not understanding what was happening. It seemed to him that the dungeon had already been cleared, but Hennim called it nonsense, for the gate had just opened. Once close enough to the anthill, even the omniscient squad leader was greatly surprised by what he saw. The anthill was indeed empty, which made many people confused. Entering a new dungeon, which no one has not yet cleaned, create expectations of a huge pile of monsters storing precious items. But today's dungeon was fundamentally different from the others. Someone assumed that it was cleared in another area, but it turned out to be a stupid guess, because everyone knew that the past dungeon does not open twice. The commander himself couldn't believe it, but the nonsense turned out to be true. No one knew who was able to clear the anthill, but looking at the traces left behind, it was obvious that someone had already fought them. To top it all off, the ants were also nowhere to be seen, which would put a stop to the speculation. However, the commander ordered everyone to immediately shut up and look for tracks, not believing that they could have all disappeared. At the same moment, someone in the group looked down and cried out in surprise. That was when Hennim leaned down irritably, not understanding why he was yelling and scaring the others. As it turned out, the group of hunters, without realizing it, was standing on a giant palm print that could fit 20 people. The whole group instantly gathered in a heap, trembling with fear. It was hard to believe that there was something huge in this dungeon that could leave such a huge footprint, because there was nothing like that in the reports. If it was a monster, it might be a level destruction monster. Such a creature was clearly beyond the teeth of the hunters who entered, which did not correspond to its rank. Gnashing his teeth in fear, the commander lightningly rushed out, shouting for everyone to retreat. He truly believed that they wouldn't be able to handle the monster that had destroyed the devil ants. If they let their guard down even for moments, they might be killed before they even started doing anything. Heeding his advice, the group decided to retreat first, and afterward contact the association and report the footprint they had found. There was no fool who would want to stay there, so soon everyone left the dungeon. Having done everything they had agreed on, they handed over all the information to the guild with the photos as proof. The head took this situation as an emergency, so he immediately began to evaluate the handprint that was sent. He was told that the print was found near a devil ant hill, but that wasn't what was most strange. The secretary added that the hunters had ended up in a scavenged dungeon, which in itself could not have been possible. After listening and looking over the evidence, the heir to the Goryu group, Kim Hyung-suk, ordered that he be notified of any new information related to the case. Reasoning over the print, he immediately realized that it wasn't an ordinary monster, but the hand wasn't big enough to call it a new species. Perhaps this monster belonged to a mythical rank that not many people knew about yet. But what if a monster above the destruction rank really appeared? Strange things began to happen more and more frequently, so Kim Hyung-suk became increasingly worried about the fate of the country. Standing up from his chair, he went to the window and looked out at the city, remembering the horrors that people had once experienced. He couldn't allow them to happen again, so he decided to put all his efforts into this matter. Meanwhile, Jiha was quietly trading in his store, unaware of what was going on in the mind of the guild leader who didn't know about the war between the Terradrones and Devil Ants. The weather was fine in Seoul today, so Jiha closed the store for a while and went to Area 5. There, he stood quietly under a building with an intercom waiting on the person he had previously arranged to meet. Fortunately, the long wait didn't come, so after he was called out, he immediately turned his head towards the source of the sound and smiled. Running in his direction was a beautiful girl that, taking a book under her arm, greeted him. Winking at him, she apologized for the delay and said that he could just go inside and wait there. However, that wasn't a problem for him, so our hero simply asked her not to run, worrying that she might fall. As he expected, she immediately found herself on the ground. In a way, one could consider him a prophet, but he just knew her too well. After all, this wasn't the first time she had fallen like this. Jiha approached her and asked her about her condition, but she just quickly said that the book was intact, and there was nothing to worry about, and then started to get up from her knees. However, that wasn't what he meant at all, but he didn't bother to correct her. That clumsy girl was Hwang Sun-young, the only huntress with origami skill in South Korea. Smiling awkwardly, she scratched the back of her head and began to justify her fall by saying that she hadn't exercised in a long time, so she had even forgotten how to walk. There were a lot of differences between her and Jiha, but the fact that Hwang Sun-young turned out to be a bookworm united their interests. Holding out a green-wrapped box to her, he handed her a breakfast from Jumi that he asked her to take care of. Hwang Sun-young was surprised that this was the only reason our hero had come to her, but catching a whiff of food, she thanked him for his concern. As she took the box in her arms, she realized that something was holding her back, and remembering the book, she held it out to Jiha. Last time she had gone to the store looking for a new story, but that day his manager had been rather sad because of this book. As it turned out, people were buying it as a piece of jewelry, and then coming back and demanding a refund. It was quite beautiful and stylish, so even though it was useless, they still bought it as a gift. Hwang Sun-young thought that the book would go well with the main character's interior, so she gave it to Jiha. The information that she was being returned seemed scary, but he still accepted the gift. Feeling some sort of power in his hands, he looked at it and was a bit surprised at what started to happen afterward. The object exuded a muted green color, so one could guess that she wasn't just a piece of paper. The system notification announced that he had received an endless spell book, but in order to write something down in it, he would need to use a petrol quill and ink. Turning to Hwang Sun-young, he decided to clarify whether this book was indeed a common decoration, but the answer was quite expected. She also thought it was strange what was being said about it, but there really wasn't anything written inside. Besides, she had also tried to leave her notes there, but that idea had failed as well. The manager must have also tried to try out the power of the book, but it didn't work out, so he decided to put it as a decoration. Jiha was stunned by what he heard. Why did the information window pop up for him then? Most likely, she was simply not shown any data, causing her to calmly give it away, without asking for anything in return. Our hero looked at her suspiciously, thinking about his own, but she thought that she did not please with the gift, and was ready to take the book back. However, it turned out to be quite the opposite. After saying that he liked the book, Hwang Sun-young was very happy that she was able to give him something worthwhile. Looking at such a valuable book, he promised that he would use it to the fullest. He didn't know anything about it, but no one forbade experimentation. After saying goodbye to Hwang Sun-young, our hero went to his store, where he opened the book and started writing. As he had been told earlier, it was not possible to leave notes neither with a pen nor with pencils. The information mentioned that he would need a petrol quill and ink. Somehow, he would be able to get the information about the petrel, but there would be a small problem. The petrel is a bird that is rarely seen in various desert areas, except in the oceans of the polar desert. In addition, it has a wingspan of approximately 25 meters. It's hard to imagine fighting against such an enormous bird. Looking at its size, Jiha immediately realized that killing it and taking the feather would not be an easy task. On top of that, it was also rare, which meant that it would take more than one day to hunt. Giving up without even trying, our hero still decided to make the book an object of decoration, as the bookstore said. However, as soon as he put his hand on the sheet, particles of magic and system windows appeared in the air, granting him the skills of good handwriting and ancient magic. Jiha couldn't believe that he had been given a new trait and didn't realize what this ability was for a long time. Squeezing his palm, he tested the gifted power, but felt nothing. However, the fact that he had managed to get it could not be a mere coincidence. Taking the pencil that he got from the nightstand in his hand, he tried to write the words on the usual yellowed pages. This time the protagonist succeeded. The few lines he wrote raised his good handwriting skill level to level 2. After receiving his new ability, Jiha tried out many things and learned a few facts. 1. He still couldn't write in a spellbook even after mastering such a useful trait. And 2. His handwriting had now gained elegance, as if he had graduated from a calligraphy school. In a way, it was a useful trait, because before he wrote like a chicken with his paw, but now anyone would understand his words. As he looked at what he had written and thought about where he could apply it, his heart thumped loudly in his chest, making him nervous. This state lasted for a few seconds, but it made our hero very alert who didn't realize what had happened. Jiha quickly enough guessed what would happen, so he literally flew out the door of the store in a second. As expected, a portal opened up right next to his shop, and it looked like it was alerting people. The parameters of the portal said that it was of 0 rank. It was for working-class people, and it was only open for an hour. After reading this information, our hero could not believe his eyes, because to meet such a gate seemed to be an unprecedented luck. It was as if the portal was meant only for him, and it led directly to the petrol. Could it be the beautiful handwriting? He had a black viscous aura that scared people, but if he was a 0, it might be all right. All one had to do was just cross the threshold and find out. However, going there empty-handed was too reckless. Even though he was a rank 0, he was leading a direct path to a huge bird. Therefore, after returning to his store, Jiha gathered the things he needed and entered another dimension that was breathtakingly beautiful. Huge waterfalls surrounded by forests created a rainbow over the surface that was mesmerizing in its brilliance. This location was perfect for the petrel's habitat. Just thinking about it, he heard the cry of a bird of prey behind him as it approached him. Turning around at the sound, anyone with an instinct for self-preservation would have given a yank and started hiding in the bushes, but the protagonist stayed put, shackled by fear. Her eyes burned red and her feathers developed a dark aura, intimidating her victim. Just as the information said, the storm petrel appeared to be of enormous size. Looking up, our hero could not believe that he had managed to see in reality such a huge rare bird that was the size of a building. However, the question of how to catch it was still open, which made him want to sob. Feeling something soft on his face, Jiha opened his eyes and looked at the blue feather slowly descending downwards. As it turned out, the storm petrel had thrown off a dozen feathers and quietly flew back to its nest, leaving our hero alive. He was incredibly lucky, so he quickly began to collect items to his backpack without missing a single feather from the field of view. Now it was just a matter of finding ink. Luckily, he already had an idea where he could find it without expending any effort. He paid a visit to the pterodrones, who were kind enough to share the green liquid they themselves made from an extract of green herbs. Even Jiha was surprised at how quickly they had found it, but he was still just as glad that he had reached out to them. After looking over the flask, he thanked them for their assistance and put it in his pocket. All the necessary items had been found, so they could begin their experiment. All that remained was to unravel the mystery of the endless spellbook he had prudently brought with him. Crouching on the nearest rock, our hero stuck his quill into the calligraphy rod. He wondered what riddle the book held, and then he made a few strokes. Since no one had any idea what it could do, he had to solve its mystery himself. As soon as he touched the book with his quill, the letters literally turned into yellow symbols that swirled around him. After flying a bit, they settled on one of the nearby trees where they recreated the full text of the message. As it turned out, they were runes that shimmered with golden light, surprising Jiha in the process. They froze on the tree trunk, waiting to be deciphered. In an old book, Jiha read about a great tree that taught people 4 spells. They were creation, harmony, change and destruction. But this power was hard to control, so runes were developed. The world tree gave them knowledge, but ancient magic was hard to control, so they created runic words to apply magic. However, our hero had never heard of anyone using runes. It seemed that he had managed to discover something new, a knowledge hitherto unknown to him. What he saw in the forest turned out to be exactly that elaborate cipher. As one could guess, they appear if certain conditions are met. But why were they engraved on the tree and not in a spell book? Come to think of it, this was the exact tree that Jiha had revived when he first came to this forest. It was hard for him to believe that such a small, almost withered sprout was a world tree. However, that wasn't what was important right now. It was unclear whether the runes would disappear in the future, so the protagonist decided to write in a book. It was the first time he had seen these inscriptions, but somehow it seemed as if he knew the designations of each of them. Destruction, the fire that will set everything on fire, read the inscription on the tree trunk. Copying each rune into the spellbook, our hero emphasized that the spell held some very harsh phrases. At the same moment, the system notified him that the Scroll of Change had gained the power of destruction, which increases the destructive power of rune magic. The book itself was filled with fire that did not burn and turned the written lines into a scroll. Jiha did not want to do so, as the book would quickly thin and become useless. However, there was no choice, and the conjecture had to be tested. Rolling it up and tying it up with a red ribbon made a spell that was quite convenient to use. Such a product would sell well in his store, so the protagonist decided to write another 99 scrolls while there was still time. He was about to reach for the book to continue his work, but it began to exude power. The torn-off sheet reappeared in the book as if no one had done anything. This could only mean that the spellbook was truly endless. With such a marvelous item, one could not worry about money until old age, and he even had plenty of ink so Jiha could make as many scrolls as he wanted. The only problem was that he didn't know what their properties were. It was only said to increase the destructive power of rune magic, and since our hero was not a mage, there was no way to test it. Unless you give it to some magician, and then from him and learn everything. Just this day, such a person came to his store right after Jiha returned home. In front of him stood Hua Yun herself in full uniform, holding a staff with a scarlet crystal behind her. Seeing our hero at the table, she took a quick step towards him, not hiding the anger on her face. Hitting the table hard with her hand, the store mooned at the sound of her blow. Turning to him, she irritably remarked that Jiha was hard to catch on. He had no idea how many times she had come to see him, but he knew one thing for sure. She was just like Heijin Si. Apologizing for his action, the protagonist replied that the store was closed for personal reasons, so it doesn't open as often as it used to. After evaluating his appearance, she agreed with Chulhyun's words that Jiha was an unremarkable person. While she was assessing him, the man shivered in sweat from her fearful gaze pondering about what he had managed to do wrong. It wasn't a problem for Hua Yun that he was useless. After all, she hadn't come for him at all. Looking around the shelves behind our hero, she examined the quality of his potions that made Seo Hyejin stronger. After coughing a bit, she apologized for her behavior and said that she should have thought about the fact that he might have his reasons. After that, she pulled out her wallet, from which she pulled out her business card. Changing her expression to a more welcoming one, she handed him the business card, which had a red image of a coat of arms on it, and introduced herself as the head of the Eternal Flame Guild. After explaining to him that she had gotten hold of information that he had unique items, she had come to verify the rumors in person. Jiha immediately realized that it would be about the sun apple, which made their negotiations much easier. After all, he was not only selling the apple, but also the winter strawberry potion, which simplified the battle in many dungeons. Right now, they were in high demand and were leaving like hotcakes, so it was no news that she had come to him. After asking for a few minutes, he started looking for items on the shelves, for as Hua Yun had said earlier, she had had a few bad experiences coming to him, so he wanted to give something on the house. This was wild to her, for they were not in a market and were talking about rather expensive products. However, she didn't have to turn them down either. Turning around to her, our hero turned pale and did not know what to say. Due to some circumstances, he had run out of all the potions, which he regretted greatly. Jiha had gotten too engrossed and neglected his work due to the incident with the Terra drones and the endless spellbook. Even he himself was beginning to doubt whether he was really a shopkeeper. After all, he had never run out of anything before. A little upset, the protagonist asked Hua Yun to come back tomorrow when they were ready. From the situation, she was missing all the words she wanted to say originally. It took her a long time to realize whether he was kind or stupid, but that wouldn't make the goods appear. Since they were out, there was nothing that could be done. Turning toward the door, she frustratedly dragged her feet toward the exit. She wanted badly to use them in the dungeon she was going to today, but she'd end up having to reappear tomorrow. Luckily, remembering the scrolls she had made, he stood her up and asked about her skills. By the looks of it, it was clear that she was skilled in fire magic, but still decided to ask again, and his guesses were confirmed. Holding out his own handmade spell, Jiha asked to use it as compensation for his time. Chahua Yan was greatly surprised when she was slipped a plain scroll, but the protagonist explained that he had only made it yesterday as a test sample. He was sorry to let her go empty-handed, so he decided to give it to the mage. Since she was so kindly offered an alternative, there was no reason to refuse. Opening the paper, it lit up with a bright flame similar to her hair. After reading the words on the scroll, "Your fire will set everything on fire," Chahua Yan began to play with the flames. Luckily, she liked both the phrase and the gift she had received so unexpectedly. After saying goodbye to each other, she closed the doors and headed towards her team. However, as she was leaving, Jiha noticed that her staff had changed slightly. The sickle-shaped end with a core inside began to brightly emit an orange light. Had it shone like this originally? Meanwhile, Chahua Yan met up with her men and entered the Spider-Girl dungeon. The guardian monster was destroyed rather quickly, but the squad leader told them not to relax and to stick to the formation, occasionally looking around. As expected, fire magic worked perfectly against the insects, turning them into ash. As she continued to run forward, she tried to keep up the enthusiasm of the group, so she praised them little by little. If they kept working like this, getting to the center would be easy enough. All the while she had to fight the monsters. She noticed that her strength was getting more than usual. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could clearly see the runestone raging. Chahua Yan was on her guard the entire time, but as soon as she thought about it for a second, she found herself under attack. Luckily, she was warned in time, which allowed her to jump aside, avoiding the viscous liquid the spider-girls were spitting. The man who had warned her was excited about the incident, so quickly asked how she was, but all seemed fine. There was one threat, however, that could have caused their operation to fail. As it turned out, there were a lot more monsters than the report said. The guy replied that there were a lot of changing factors in this dungeon, so it was not always possible to accurately determine the state of the dungeon. But what to do next? Retreat or regroup? After thinking about it for a bit, Chahua Yan ordered to forget about it and continue the offensive. Of course, everyone was worried about the condition of the guild manager's head and didn't want her to overdo it, but this time was very different. They didn't have to worry about her today, because thanks to the scroll, her strength had increased several times, and she was now capable of doing anything. Raising her staff into the air, she spoke the words of the scroll, and then the runes began to flow together, creating a powerful attack that no one had ever seen from her before. Chahua Yan ordered everyone to immediately fall back if they didn't want to be hit. Pointing her weapon in front of her, she directed the magic forward, whereupon a huge stream of flames began to incinerate every living thing that came under its influence. Every spider-girl that was ridiculously exposed to the fire began squirming in agony, eating at the entire forest. It was over very quickly, after which a squad of hunters began to cheer Chahua Yan on. No one knew how much she had raised her skill level, but they were sure that at this rate, they would succeed in destroying everyone. To some extent, even she herself could not believe her power and stood still for a while. Looking at the scepter, she had an option as to why this was happening, but it was a bit hard to believe in such a thing. Could a scroll created by an ordinary worker really be capable of such a thing? As Jiha had promised, the next day he prepared a case of the required potion, spending the entire night making it. Looking at his labor, he estimated the size of the order, trying to determine the right amount. Just in case, he made sun apple potions and winter strawberry potions, just in case someone else came to the store. When they stood side by side, it felt as if day and night were facing each other, for those had yellow and blue colors. Leaving the box on the table, our hero looked at the wall, where hung a clock that showed 7:30. The only thing left to do was to pack the goods before Huanxi came, for she had said she would come early in the morning, so he should hurry. After a while, the bell hanging on the door began to ring loudly, announcing a visitor. As it turned out, it was Chahua Yan, to whom he happily informed that he had just prepared the potions she had requested yesterday. This time, however, she didn't come alone. Behind her stood a man in a business suit who was presumably a member of her guild. Chahua Yan had thought it appropriate to discuss elixirs later, but now to talk about a more delicate topic. There was no point in refusing him, but deep in his heart lurked some worry about the scroll he had given away yesterday. Fortunately, his fear was not justified, and now, in front of his face, lay a large briefcase filled with a huge pile of money. Jiha didn't understand what was going on, so he sat on the chair in deep shock. Asking what it was, the guild leader calmly replied that there was money in there. Looking at his reaction, she even assumed that he was the type of person who was obsessed with money and greedy enough to want more. Of course, that didn't explain why he was selling potions at such a low price. However, all this was not about our hero, so he got nervous about the accusations and replied that everyone likes money. He was just a little surprised when such a large sum was put on the table. After that, an awkward silence hung. In the complete silence, Cha Hua-yeon's voice was enchantingly soft, so it was a pleasure to listen to. She began to talk about the scroll that had unexpectedly fallen into her hands. Its effects were unimaginable, and it was also of the A class or even S class. She was grateful that she had gotten it for free, but she couldn't just let it go. The protagonist completely understood her feelings, for as expected, the endless spellbook made for excellent spells. As she continued the dialogue, she emphasized that if he was uncomfortable receiving such an amount in cash, he could easily have it transferred to his account, as it suited him. However, what Jiha said shocked her mind. After expressing his gratitude, he flatly refused to accept the money. As stated earlier, our hero had given the scroll as an apology for the long wait. He considered himself an ordinary person, so he couldn't accept her money. Still, whatever the outcome, she had gotten the scroll as an experimental item. Cha Hua-yeon couldn't leave this situation unresolved, so she said that it would take a few seconds to turn a good person into a stupid person. The secretary who had been standing next to her the whole time wanted to stop her, but she continued her speech. Take, for example, the goose that lays the golden eggs. What would happen to people if she gave them away for nothing? Jiha, thinking it was a reference of some sort, briefly replied that everyone would be rich, but the answer was fundamentally wrong. Everyone would immediately know about it, and many would even try to capture the goose, wanting to single-handedly own its riches. Of course, the fact that the protagonist was on the side of the hunters was good news in itself, but at the same time, it was no less dangerous. That was why she wanted to make him a rather pleasant and favorable offer. Her eyes instantly shone with fire as she offered to join the Eternal Flame Guild. This was quite an unexpected offer that needed to be thought about properly. Cha Hua-yeon had said some bad things earlier just because she was worried about him, but at the same time, she wanted to attract him to her guild. There would be many people in this world who wanted to deceive him for their own gain, but she wanted to prevent that from happening. Besides, they had brought our hero a lot of money to prove that they could reward Jiha's abilities properly. Eternal Flame was a guild known for its benefits, so he replied that they didn't need to go that far to convince him. However, she still wanted to show that such a famous guild would be able to take good care of him. To top it all off, they had many mages, but they also had alchemists as well. After patting the secretary on the shoulder, she introduced Chulin-si as their chief alchemist, supplying them with potions. Besides him, there were other skillful alchemists there, and even to them, they provided plenty of opportunities for their experiments, so there were no restrictions on research as such. If Jiha did agree to join them, the guild would try to make his salary as close to what he wanted as possible. Moreover, Cha Hua-yeon would agree to let him hold the position of chief or even higher. She did her best to attract him to her, but our hero only thanked her for her sparkling words and agreed to accept only them as a sign of goodwill. Cha Hua-yeon quickly commanded Chulin-si to get the contract out as quickly as possible to sign the agreement, but he froze, for he was the first to realize what Jiha had said. Literally a second later, and she realized what they had been told, so she was in deep shock at the rejection. She couldn't understand why he didn't agree to what was offered, so she was willing to raise the stakes and make the terms more generous. But for him, initially, everything was too much. He believed that there were more talented people that would be perfect for the position, so he was willing to sacrifice such an expensive place. After saying those words, she was literally boiling with anger and was ready to pounce on him, having spent days pounding into him that he was worthy of this position. The patient Chul-heng-si was the only one holding back her impulse to fight and trying to resolve the situation. However, Cha Hua-yeon was not going to stop and shouted at the top of her voice, asking Jiha to stop humiliating herself. She only managed to keep quiet and calm down when he spoke, but it was not a fun story. He was originally a low-ranked hunter and had no powers whatsoever. He was able to create these potions not because of his skills, but only because he was lucky enough to find good friends. He was sure that one day his abilities might disappear, so he wasn't sure if he could do great things for a long time. In addition, Jiha had become very attached to his little store. Of course, Cha Hua-yeon didn't want to miss out on such a potential hunter, but the judicious Chul-heng-si stopped her. Still, it would be quite difficult for them to change his mind, so he offered to stop there and show respect for his wishes. The protagonist was glad when they backed off, but to keep his morale up, he replied that he wouldn't forget their advice for the rest of his life and would be extremely careful. That was why he had promised to raise the price of the potion she had asked for yesterday, so now they had to be careful with him. Watching this cute situation, Cha Hua-yeon only laughed. Anyone in the store would have thought that she was pushing him to do bad things. However, she was still a bit unpleasant to hear the rejection, but there was nothing she could do about it. Later, She warned him not to be afraid to ask for help if he found himself in a dangerous situation later on. Smiling at her warning, Yu asked him not to worry about him. If something like this happened, he had something that would warn him. Jiha then pointed to a plant that literally looked like a bell. In addition, it had a similar name to the buzzing bell, which made a sound if a worker was in danger. Since the gate appeared, the protagonist could no longer spend time in nature. Monsters managed to take over not only the beach and the sea, but even in the mountains and valleys they managed to adapt, so it was quite difficult to find a place free of them. Only thanks to the Forest of Dreams he managed to avoid encountering the horrible creatures, at times morally resting there. Even now, strolling along the sandy beach, Jiha finally had the opportunity to sincerely enjoy nature. The waves were humming and crashing against the sand relentlessly, creating soothing sounds. Only the subtle fragrance of the sea, like silk, touched the tip of his nose, making him sneeze at first. The view was indeed beautiful, but it was a bit hot. As expected, the sea was best for relieving headaches. Originally, the protagonist thought that there would only be a forest here, but after walking not too far, even the sea appeared. Now this place looked more like paradise than land. Today, he wanted to do some shopping, but after Cha Hua-yun came in, he got a bad headache, preventing him from working. After that, he felt like he had been robbed of his right to be the owner of his own store for a while and went into the forest. However, whatever it was, today he wanted to work on regaining his strength by sunbathing on the beach. Happy for the sudden rest, he promised himself that he would only eat and read. Working with people took too much energy, so exhausted from dealing with customers, he spent the day in the silence of the Forest of Dreams. Having made a fire in the evening, he sat comfortably surrounded by his favorite books, enjoying the last hours of his stay. But there was one minor detail that he had completely forgotten about. As if a curse had haunted him all his life, someone was always following him. No matter where Jiha went, he was never able to be alone. Even now, while doing his business, a small snow-white cat with gray spots that looked a little like a snow leopard cub suddenly came to him. After watching the beautiful sunset that shimmered on the waves of the raging sea, darkness fell. Being a thoughtful person, Jiha had built a small fire beforehand, which with its warm orange light illuminated the stone cave, creating a perfect light for reading books. It was extremely peaceful in this small shelter. The quiet crackling of wood and the chirping of crickets created a cozy atmosphere to fully experience the story being read. Once upon a time, no one had a problem listening to the sounds of the sea, but now it was occupied by monsters. Therefore, our hero is extremely lucky to be able to enjoy the sound of the waves. If only he had the chance to bring Sankohen or Sanyun Nuna here, he would do so without delay. Thoughts of his friends were like a warm blanket, warming his mind and distracting him from his hard everyday life. However, the memories of them faded away when strange sounds began to be heard from the other end of the cave. After listening to them, Jiha realized that they sounded like a cat meowing. But what was it doing here? Taking a small log from the fire, he made a torch that lit the way well enough. Getting closer and closer to the source of the sound, the protagonist realized that the meow was different from the usual voice of a cat. Could it be a lion or a tiger? Coming out of the other end of the cave, he leaned toward the humming bell that grew quietly in this forest. The plant was quite quiet and did not make a single sound, which meant that the beast roaming nearby was not dangerous. However, the pterodrone suddenly flying over his head still startled Jiha as he rushed into the thick of the forest. As he ran after the pterodrone, he began to hear the sounds of the animal screaming more and more clearly. As expected, the pterodrone led him straight to a white cat with black flecks in its fur. The system quickly identified the animal as Actus, but it was obvious from looking at it that it was larger than a normal cat. He was not in the best shape and was lying on the ground shivering and moaning in helplessness. Jiha took him in his arms, thinking he could help him by giving him a potion. At the same moment, Pterodrone began to poke our hero with his claw, trying to draw his attention to himself. Turning around at his call, he started to apologize for being distracted and forgetting about him. But what he saw next touched his soul. Several Pterodrone brought to him fish that they had caught unbeknownst to him and were dragging them on their own 2 feet from the sea itself. Our hero was amazed at their care for the cat, so praised them for their hard work in helping the forest dweller. Pride overflowed his heart, because of which, as a thank you, he scratched one of the beetles on the head and promised to bring more delicious food next time. Just like that, the cat found himself in Jiha's arms with a delicious meal and a vial of the promised potion. After he had eaten solidly, the protagonist was able to breathe a sigh of relief. It wasn't clear how he would feel about the potions, but it was worth a try. Not long ago, Actus was shivering like an autumn leaf in the wind, but judging from how soundly he was sleeping now, it seemed that everything was fine now. However, a funny thought struck Ujiha at one point. Although he had not yet had the opportunity to fully explore the Forest of Dreams, this was the first time he had met an animal here. Stroking the soft fur of the cat, he became increasingly curious about where this little friend came from. But at the same moment when his hand reached Actus's head, he suddenly opened his blue eyes and stared at him. Of course, our hero did not want to wake him up and only out of habit began to stroke his fur, so thinking that the animal might get angry, instantly removed his palm and began to apologize. But as it turned out, Actus woke up for a completely different reason, surprising Ujiha in the process. Like a little kitten, the beast began to purr and paw at his hand, twisting his flexible body in different directions. It immediately began to be stroked and cuddled even more with this behavior, suggesting that it had chosen the protagonist as its chosen one. After calming down a bit, Ujiha began to ponder over the animal's name. Although even the name Actus sounded acceptable, it was just a species designation. After deciding that the animal's coloring was similar to a white tiger, he decided to name it Beom. Looking at Actus, our hero offered him to stay with him, of course, on condition that he had nowhere else to go. After that, the beast meowed softly, because of which the sound was taken as an agreement. After sitting in the Forest of Dreams for a few more hours, Ujiha slowly packed his things and began to return home. There he set up a separate corner for sleeping and eating, and carried Beom himself to the store. There, too, the poor beast could not stay quiet for a moment. Most of the women, as soon as they saw him, would squeal at the cuteness of the store's new resident. Lying in Ujiha's arms, he seemed like an artificial doll with his eyes glistening from the light of the lamps. At some point, there were more and more people wanting to see Beom, which brought the store a huge income. Many people assumed that he belonged to the snow leopard family, but it was fundamentally wrong. Our hero found him in the dungeon and took him for himself as he had nowhere else to go. Looking at the yawning animal, a wave of sighs of delight spread throughout the building, and then he was finally introduced to Beom. One of the customers naturally wanted to pet the shining fur of the cat, so she thoughtfully asked for permission to do so. However, Beom himself was against touching other people's dirty hands, and as soon as the stranger's palm approached him, he immediately struck it with his claws. Ujiha became very nervous when the customer's hand turned red from scratching, causing him to ask how her hand was. Luckily, she was fine, unlike her broken heart. Naturally, the protagonist tried his best to smooth things over and apologize for this little incident, explaining that Beom was just shy. Stroking the animal on the head, he asked him not to throw at people anymore, while he himself in his head replayed his behavior. As it turned out, Beom was kind only to him, and to the others he treated them like assholes. If he continued to treat people like that, then keeping him in the store would not be a good idea. However, even so, he couldn't leave him at home so easily. Besides, Ujiha still wanted to show off the cuteness of his new friend. After this incident, most of the customers took their orders and went home. Instead, Seo-hye-jin came to him holding a coffee stand in her hand. She had business to attend to, so she stopped by the store, grabbing some coffee on the way, assuming he liked it. After a brief greeting, she noticed the quiet sound of a cat that had folded its paws under itself and was sitting on the counter. She instantly grabbed a coat rack standing in the corner and began to cover herself with it, asking what kind of animal was sitting next to him. The protagonist calmly called its name and introduced it as a small tiger while she trembled behind the wood, moving further away towards the exit. As it turned out, she was scared shitless of cats. Mustering up her courage, Hejin-si carefully walked over to the counter and handed the coffee to Ujiha, who hadn't even hoped for this little gift. However, in the very next second, she jumped back, asking the animal that had gotten up from its seat to stay away from her. But there was nowhere to go. Beom was now living with him, so she would be coming to the potion shop every day. No one had any idea that she would be afraid of the cat, which caused Ujiha to ask the dwarf cat to bring it down to the floor. Instead, Beom sat back down in his seat, starting to purr so loudly that he could be heard in the other room. As it turned out, the one wanted Seo-hye-jin to pet him, but this behavior of his was particularly strange. Previously, he was unwilling to let other people's hands touch his fur, but now he was willing to voluntarily rush towards her. Hearing this information, she walked over to the counter and gingerly, reaching out her palm closer and closer, touched Beom. His fur was very soft, and the vibrating sounds from his purring made it feel like a light massage on her fingertips. Still, this tiger was one of the gentlest animals Hejin-si had ever met. The name tiger was the only thing that came from it, and as such, it turned out to be a very even affectionate beast. Playing with the cat had knocked out all the thoughts with which she had come to the store, so she did not immediately remember the reason for which she had come. She had come here to warn Jiha that Hunter.net was getting more and more violent because it was giving away free reinforcement scrolls. However, this was no longer news. Shrugging his shoulders, he replied that even so, the leader of the Eternal Flame had already come yesterday. He gave Chahwa-yon a scroll that was worth at least a few million, which suggested that he was either not an ambitious person or simply a fool. However, Seo Hyejin was sure that he was just the kind of person who didn't calculate anything and wasn't greedy, an ordinary salesman that does good to the people around him. Perhaps that's what attracts people to him, and that's the reason why she started coming to his store so often. Even just watching he begged Byam to stop chewing and stretching his shirt told her that he had no evil intentions. Except that this idyll was interrupted by the fiercely loud ringing of a humming bell that grew behind the counter of the store. Such trembling of the plant could only mean one thing. What he was here for, a warning of the danger that could threaten his life. After that, all the loudspeakers began to announce the occurrence of a Type 4 disaster, asking all residents living nearby to urgently evacuate the area. Unfortunately, this was not a drill, so Hyejin-si shouted for Jiha to leave the store immediately. In the haste and utter confusion, our hero had to leave the building immediately, running away with his so-called kitty in his arms. The hunters have arrived, and the armed forces are coordinating with them to lead the people and guide them to the evacuation sites. Young, old men, women, and children, anyone who can be affected by the upcoming disaster, is being quickly transported to a safer place, and that includes Jiha and little Byam. If it's a Type 4 warning, they must be facing the catastrophe of a Category 4 dungeon. If that's the case, there will be quite a lot of strong hunters in the area. Jiha can only hope that they will be enough to stop the incoming danger. Byam senses that something is wrong and is feeling anxious in the middle of the crowded evacuation area, while Jiha tries to comfort the little guy as much as he can. Everything is going smoothly until the ground starts shaking wildly. Everyone in the designated area feels the quake, and chaos and fear immediately take hold of everyone. When the shaking subsides, Jiha asks himself if it is still too early to feel reassured. Byam is visibly upset by all the strange things happening around. The little feline and his teary eyes are way too cute. Jiha is moving like a real cat dad and trying his best to comfort his little friend. He continues to reassure himself that the ground shake was probably nothing, and that they will be fine. In this world, a catastrophe is not your run-of-the-mill disaster. It occurs when a crisis arises and hunters entering the dungeon fail to complete their quest. There won't be any major problem with catastrophes of a low-difficulty dungeon. Those are easy to contain and deal with. But there are rare cases like this one that go down a lot differently. It happens when a rank 4 or higher dungeon suffers a catastrophe. In the event of a failure this massive, civilians within the radius of 20 kilometers of the gate are to be evacuated. Every armed force that could spare manpower carries out military operations while deploying their finest armored forces. And of course, high-ranking hunters are mobilized as they are the most well-informed and well-equipped against matters concerning dungeons. The Sword Witch, Seo Hyejin, and everyone else are on standby, as everyone simultaneously feels the descent of ungodly forces. The dungeon gate, which looks like a dimensional rift, slowly starts cracking and growing unstable by the second. Finally, the first wave of the monsters breaking free to wreak havoc and spread the catastrophe has broken through to the human world. It seems like this time the enemies would be skeleton warriors brought back from the dead. Humanity's first line of defense opens fire with heavy artillery from the military forces. Every soldier who can hold a gun, whether it's automatic, semi-automatic, anything that fires and fires a lot, rains down lead on the monsters trying to encroach on the human world. Next come the targeted airstrikes being dropped from up in the sky. Fighter jets and their highly trained pilots rain down explosives to pinpoint and wipe out the incoming horde of skeletons in an open area. These skeleton monsters are also known as leeches. If these are the type of monsters that triggered the catastrophe, then the undead dungeon attack must have failed. Goryeo Group successor Kim Hyung-suk remains confident that even against these liches, their firepower would be enough to end it soon. He is already thinking of how to get away right after finishing up the remnants. He turns to one of the commanding military officers and suggests a focus fire on the gate itself. The hunters will deal with the monsters that slip through the cracks in the curse-using leeches. Kim Hyung-suk is quite certain that this operation is a lock for success, but that would only be the case if there's no other variable in the mix. Looking at the gate and the gigantic grotesque creature emerging from it with its red eyes and disgusting mouth, it is starting to look like the worst is yet to come. Hyung-suk identifies the creature coming out of the gate as a monstrous being. He immediately alerts all forces to up the urgency and focus their entire firepower on the bastard that has just emerged from the fractured dungeon gate. Next comes the green light for open fire, an all-out attack that will pour out everything that human technology is capable of given the circumstance. Hellfire of explosives coming from the skies and the ground rains down on the monstrous being, but it's looking like it is not faltering with its advance at all. It even taunts the military forces by catching one of the missiles right out of the air and putting the damn thing in its mouth. The booming sound and the scorched earth explosion that result from the combination of everything that the military has are destructive to the highest degree. The foot soldiers see this and start celebrating their successful defense against the monstrous being. It looks like their focused firepower was quite effective at first glance. But Kim Hyung-suk knows that a monstrous being is a disaster-rank creature. This much attack, no matter how impressive or destructive it is, won't even leave a scratch on it. As the smoke, dust, and debris settle, what emerges is the unscathed hideous giant with a permanent mocking smile on its ugly face. It is capable of almost human thought, and in its demented head, it just keeps repeating that there are enemies, dangerous enemies. And when there are dangerous enemies, it must kill. The monstrous being literally tanks every explosive and high-caliber bullet thrown at it, and it is now ready to take the initiative for its own attack. Kim Hyung-suk notices that the monster is angling their way and orders the armed forces to dodge the incoming charge. Everyone has not gotten out of the way yet, but it seems like that won't be a problem. The massive undead monster just passes them by without attacking at all. That bastard's goal is not the attacking military units in the front lines. It is so much worse than that. It is the spherical evacuation center at the heart of the city. The monstrous being is blowing by every single enemy in sight and is only focused on the area where most of the people in the city have gathered. In this fast-paced battle, the high-ranking hunters have not gotten the chance to show off what they are capable of. They refuse to let this ugly bastard rush into the evacuation shelter without a fight. The attacking effort is being led by the Sword Witch herself. She comes from a high angle with her magical blades lined up for a sharp attack. She then executes her special move, the technique that ripped a manstalker into shreds, her powerful sword rampage. The assault of the high-ranking hunters is not done yet. Eternal Flame Guild Master Cha Hua-yun also wants a piece of the kill, as she orders everyone to stand back while she fires off one of her specialties. Using her runic wand enhanced by the scroll that Jiha made, she fires off a scorching fireball that is more destructive than man-made bombs. After that brutal assault of special moves, the monstrous being feels no pain at all. It still remains unscathed. As if to rub salt on the guild leader and the Sword Witch's wounded egos, the monster does not even bother turning back to face them, as if they did not even register to the creature's radar. At last, the monstrous being has come close enough to the evacuation shelter to lift its fist up and gather whatever mysterious energy that makes the undead so strong. In one punch, it tears a massive hole through the most secure and reinforced building in the city. This sphere was supposed to be a haven where people could expect to be safe from anything. The Sword Witch immediately rushes in to go back into the action, even though Cha Hua-yan warned her that getting close to the monster would be dangerous. She just cannot stand around and watch as people inside the shelter die. Jiha is in there. The monstrous being rears its ugly mug and grotesque undead body in the hole that it made, while the thought of finally finding the enemy continuously repeats inside its thick head. Who would have thought that the monster ignored all the attacks and all the forces outside to look for Jiha and Biom? Now that the shelter has been breached, it is safe to say that the situation outside is not looking good. Jiha knows that the reasonable thing to do was to run away, but the fear has trapped his legs into the floor, and they won't move at all. He begs and begs for his trembling legs to move to no avail. After a while, his lower body finally gains enough strength to take a step back. But it might just be too late. The monstrous being has already reached out its hand to pick him up. In its mind, it's starting to feel confused as this man up front is not the strong enemy that it has set out to look for. Bayam looked as though he was just an anxious and adorable house cat earlier, but the little guy is now breathing in intensely with not a hint of fear in those beady eyes. The little feline launches an attack of concentrated force right into the monster's palm that wanted so badly to grab them in a tight grip. Biom has stopped the immediate danger, and he is not stopping now. The Actus jumps out of Jiha's embrace and faces the monstrous being directly. Biom then starts talking to the monstrous being telepathically, calling it a lowly demonic being. After hearing that domineering voice inside its head, the monster that rendered every human force useless loses its grotesque smile and starts sweating nervously. Biom continues to speak directly inside the undead's head while roaring with all his might. For a brief moment, the form of a fully grown Actus appears like a terrifyingly ferocious mirage. It invokes a primal fear inside the monstrous being's mind, causing it to stop moving altogether. Outside, the sword witch also feels that an enormous amount of ether just got unleashed from the inside of the shelter. Well, whatever it was, it has given the high-ranking hunters another chance when the monstrous being is just standing there frozen. Eternal Flame Guild leader Cha Hua Yan already knows what the sword witch needs before she can even ask for help. Hua Yan fires a nourishing flame directly onto the sword witch's blade. It looks as though her weapon has absorbed the guild leader's destructive potential. With that boost in strength and fire attribute, Seo Hyejin's and Cha Hua Yan's combo attack rages on as the fire sword rampant. This time, the monster cannot just ignore the pain or remain unscathed. The combined force of two rankers is impossible to contend with when you are under the primal fear of Biome's corporeal mirage. That single series of attacks almost takes everything that the sword witch has in her gas tank. When Hua Yuan walks forward to confirm if the mission is over, Hyejin replies that they cannot let their guard down yet, especially against whatever it is that released an enormous amount of ether inside the evacuation shelter. Upon entering through the massive opening that the monster made, the only ones the hunters see are Jiha and Biome. It is just the gentle store manager and his adorable pet that can secretly dominate a disaster-level threat with no problems. The monster was defeated. Watching the others deal with the aftermath of the attack, Seo was surprised to note that she no longer felt the ether. Remembering what had happened, she couldn't help but wonder what it was all about, and what she had felt at the time. Finally getting home and taking a shower, Yu could finally relax. With a sigh of relief, he noted that today had been a really crazy day. Fortunately, however, everything had turned out all right. As soon as he sat down on the chair, Biome immediately jumped into his lap. He started rubbing against him, begging to be petted. Unable to resist this temptation, our hero began to caress him. He praised Biome for a job well done, as it was only because of that he was alive now. Yu also noted that when they had encountered the monster, his pet had seemed very angry. However, there was no trace of that anger now. While our hero was thinking about the monster, an interesting thought suddenly popped into his head, which he immediately decided to write in an endless book of spells. While our hero was writing something in the book, on the screen of someone's laptop appeared information about the recently defeated monster, which appeared from the gate of level 4 and almost destroyed the hideout. That laptop belonged to none other than the heir of the Goryu group, Kim Hyun-suk. Seeing the information that appeared on the website, he was very surprised. The website said that the newly appeared monster was 15 meters tall and ugly, but it had tremendous strength. But that's not what surprised Kim Hyun-suk. In fact, he couldn't believe that the information on the website had been updated. At the same time, our hero finished writing and closed the book. Humming a cheerful tune, he said that what he had written should have been enough. Lastly, he wondered if this was the kind of site where no one could edit anything. After a while, the three largest hunter guilds met to discuss the past incident. They all knew that the monster had been killed by the airwave, but it wasn't their hunters who did it. However, if the ether had not exploded, there was no telling if they would have been able to stop the monster in time. Everyone only had one question: who did it? Everyone excitedly began to discuss and offer their options. Some said it was a simple phenomenon. Others said that not everyone in the asylum had felt the etheric blast. Some suggested to investigate the asylum to find the reason. After hearing all the speculations, Kim Hyun-suk asked if they had seen the update on MirWiki. Without waiting for an answer, he continued by saying that someone had the power to not only scare the monster, but also to add that information to a site that no one could edit. Hearing this, Seo Hyejin said that two assumptions could be made from this. Either the person who chased away the monster was in an orphanage, or someone had a unique ability that was different from that of ordinary hunters. Cha Hua Yan immediately intervened in the conversation. She said that the people who were in the shelter said that they heard a cat roar when the explosion occurred. Hearing this, Kim Hyun-suk said that he didn't think the information could help them. However, that one went on to say that that strange shopkeeper was also there. Furthermore, he had a cat that looked a lot like a snow leopard. From what they heard, everyone present was shocked. After a while, Yu was standing behind his store as usual. When he heard that someone had come, he greeted them with a smile as usual. However, when he took a closer look, he realized that the visitors this time were not ordinary. After all, the three heads of the largest guilds were in front of him. Yu was a little frightened when he saw them walking towards him with determination. Not understanding why three such important people had come to him at once, he worriedly asked what had happened. However, it was much simpler than he had imagined. All they wanted was to see his cat. Yu wondered if they had come just to see Biome. He wanted to add that Biome would get scared and run away if they made so much noise. But in the next moment, a rustling sound was heard nearby. causing everyone to look over there. As it turned out, it was Biom, who, to everyone's surprise, jumped onto the counter. Like an ordinary cat, he yawned sweetly and stretched. All three guild heads immediately rushed over to him, trying to see if he was the one who had caused the ether to explode. Biom looked at the guests and meowed in bewilderment as if asking what they wanted from him. Cha Huayan decided to take a closer look at the cat and picked him up. She wondered if he was the one who had caused the airwave, because at first glance he seemed to be an ordinary cat. Yu immediately panicked and told her to let him go as he didn't like being held like that. However, she didn't pay attention to his warnings. Turning to the others, she said she didn't feel the presence of ether in that one. She was sure that if that cat had been the culprit of the explosion, she had certainly sensed it. Bayom, who didn't particularly like sitting in a stranger's arms, tried to pull away. Realizing that the girl was not going to let him go, he immediately sank his sharp fangs into her hand, causing her to cry out painfully. Bayom jumped out of the girl's hands and jumped back onto the counter. Yu told the irritated Cha Huayan to be careful, as Bayom had a temper and could bite. At the same time, Xiao Hyejin intervened. She said that she heard that he was at the orphanage during the incident with the monster. She added that she heard that someone heard a cat roar right before the monster escaped. Hearing this, Yu smiled awkwardly and replied that his cat might have actually gotten scared and started meowing loudly. Fixing his points, Kim Hyunsuk thoughtfully replied that that was indeed the case. Even though he agreed with it, he still had his doubts. However, when he saw the cat trying to jump on his master's head, he realized that their suspicions were false. There was no way he could believe that there was a cat in front of him who could stop such a strong monster. But it didn't matter, because if he could, he would try to hire the store clerk right now. But this wasn't the right time. Even though Cha Huayan had already been rejected once, it was clear that she wasn't going to give up, and Kim Hyunsuk had no desire to compete with her. Deciding to put that idea off until a better time, he turned around and headed for the exit. He told our hero that he would see her again. Cha Huayan immediately followed him, saying that she wanted to see him rejected too. Xiao Hyejin, on the other hand, didn't stay long. Smiling brightly, she promised to come back again. Our hero didn't mind at all and replied that she could come back any time. That night, Yu lay on a lounge chair by the fire and read a book. He came across some information about Gehenna Continent. He had already heard about it somewhere, so he immediately started reading with interest. According to the information in the book, Gehenna Continent was a place where many different people lived together with the Great Tree. The tree created nature gods to protect the continent. After reading this, Yu was very surprised. As he continued reading, he came across a description of one of the nature gods. It had white fur with dark spots and was the raging fangs of nature. Our hero was shocked by what he read. The description of the creature he had just read about matched Biom's image exactly. Yu looked at his pet, who was sleeping peacefully on his lap, and wondered, Biom is a nature god? The realization that this might be true made him jump up sharply. Even though this little cat didn't look like a nature god, the things that had happened around him during this time hinted that it could very well be true. Yu realized that none of this could be a coincidence. The guild leaders had already mentioned that there had been a large etheric explosion in the asylum back then. And after comparing all the facts, our hero came to the conclusion that it was most likely the work of Biom's paws. Looking at the little kitten that was lying on his lap, Yu wondered if he could consider it a nature god. After all, if that was really the case, then the tree from his dream could also be the very real-world tree. When he thought about it, he realized that it all really did make sense. Yu had a feeling from the beginning that it was as if the tree had given him a job, and that it all started from the moment he received the worker class, helping the Terradrones and saving Biom. It was like it was all part of some grand plan. While our hero was thinking about this, a light suddenly began to emanate from the book he had placed next to him. In the next instant, the book opened by itself, and a bright light poured out of its pages. Such an unexpectedness surprised our hero very much. A system window popped up in front of him. The first thing that caught Yu's eye was that his class was called XXI's Worker. He immediately wondered what that meant. However, the next moment his thoughts were interrupted by a bright light that made him cover his eyes with his hands. At the same time, Hwang Sun-young was sitting in a dark room in the middle of a pile of books. Wrapped in a blanket, she listened to the news. It said that there was still a group of undead, led by a senior lich near Jirisan City. For 10 years now, the government had refused to make any attempt to confront them. However, the undead were spreading an infestation that was greatly reducing the area available for crops, which led to food shortages. And the only way to solve this was to defeat the undead. Hwang Sun-young turned off the TV without listening to the experts' opinions. She wrapped herself in a blanket and said thoughtfully that hunting the lich was not easy. We're going back to the Forest of Dreams. Yu opened his eyes and found himself standing in front of the World Tree. He turned to it and said that it had been guiding him all along, and it was it that had led him to the Forest of Dreams. Smiling, he added that he didn't know why it had given him such an important task. However, even so, he believed that there must have been some reason for it. That was why he promised that he would do his best to help him. Suddenly, a magical portal appeared behind him. Turning around, our hero looked at it with bewilderment. Watching the portal with interest, from which something was clearly going to appear, Yu wondered what it could be. Seeing that it was purple in color, our hero immediately had a guess. The very next moment, a cold and gloomy voice was heard, the owner of which began to shout all sorts of terrifying curses. Looking at the place where the portal had been recently, Yu saw a skeleton with a staff in his hands, who continued to shout furiously. However, this wasn't just any skeleton, but a true elder lich. In addition, he was not alone. He was in charge of a huge army of undead that obeyed his orders without question. According to the information he knew, the senior lich was considered a monster of terrible level. Even the strongest guilds wouldn't want to face him and his army. However, right now, to Yu, they seemed more cute than dangerous. Watching them like Gulliver watching the Lilliputians, he wondered what they were saying. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of our hero, informing him that the Elder Lich and his army were infecting the nearest lands, and they were soon to reach his land as well. Following that, the system asked if he wanted to know a few ways he could reduce his influence. Yu agreed without a second thought. He was happily ready to fulfill his duty. The War Lich, along with his army, continued to shout curses. All they wanted was death to all living things. Watching them, our hero noted that they were actually quite cute. Their attempts to appear scary and evil seemed very amusing to him. Yu realized that it would be easier for him to intervene using the ether. However, it would be even easier if he could just swat them away like he did with the ants. However, he quickly realized that he couldn't do that because this was a lich. Lichs were known to be immortal until their life source was destroyed, so this time he would not be able to deal with him so easily. Fortunately, the system informed him that in order to reduce the influence of the lich, he had to first destroy its life source. After that, the only thing left to do was to clear out the surrounding areas. Looking more closely at the half-touch, our hero could see a castle visible in the distance. Although only ruins remained of it, you could say with certainty that he had already seen it somewhere. The clue was in the flag hanging on the wall. Seeing it, our hero immediately remembered that it was the flag of the Kingdom of Estrom. And since it was destroyed and Lich had a large army of undead, the conclusion was self-evident. Namely that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Estrom could just be the undead ruled by the Lich. However, it didn't matter now. There was nothing he could do to help them now. All he had to concentrate on was victory. There was no way he could let the infection spread any further. Even though he couldn't intervene directly, that wasn't a problem. After all, he still had his army of Terra drones who followed his orders without question and were determined to win. But suddenly there was a small problem. The system reported that a large rock was blocking the army's path, preventing it from moving forward. Even though the rock seemed tiny to him, it was a huge problem for Terra drones. After all, only one warrior could fly. Deciding that if he left it up to them, it might take too long. So in the next instant, under the admiring gazes of the Terra drone, Yu had already thrown the rocks out of their way. As soon as the path was clear, they immediately rushed into battle. Their task was to find and destroy the Elder Lich's life source. But before they could do that, they needed to break through the undead army. In the next instant, the two armies clashed in a fierce battle. But it didn't last long. As the Terra drones didn't leave a chance, they defeated the undead army almost instantly. Yu was delighted to see that they had become much stronger in the meantime, and now looked more like a real army. Although the Terra drones were doing well, and had managed to kill a large number of undead, their advantage could disappear at any moment. After all, Lich still had a lot of undead he could summon. In the next moment, the Terra drones faced the undead reinforcements. However, that was not all. Raising his staff up, the Elder Lich began to cast some kind of terrifying spell. As he cast it, he instantly subjected the Terra drones to a curse that caused them to begin to feel pain. Taking advantage of the fact that they were unable to fight, the Lich ordered his army to attack. However, he suddenly encountered a problem. It was the commander of the Terra drones' army, who for some reason was not affected by the curse, and judging from his evil gaze, he was determined. The reason why the negative effects didn't work was because our hero had applied the worker's blessing, which did its job perfectly. In the next instant, the Lich's staff was in the air. Left without his only weapon, he was cornered. He tried to resist and shouted curses, but it didn't help him. The Terra drones quickly grabbed him by his limbs and pinned him to the ground. But that was not the end of it for the Lich, for he was immediately stripped of his limbs and then his entire body. He mockingly scoffed and called them idiots, saying that there was no point in destroying him because he could be resurrected at any moment. However, in the next second, he realized that he was very much mistaken. After all, during the battle, the Pterodrone had managed to find his life source. Suddenly, a system notification appeared in front of Yu, informing him that in order to destroy the source, he needed to evolve his Pterodrone warrior. The cost of evolution, on the other hand, was 5 points of essence. Though it was expensive, our hero had no choice. As soon as he pressed the confirmation button, the Pterodrone leader transformed from an ordinary warrior to a knight. He immediately rushed towards the castle at full speed. Just breaking through the wall, he broke into the room where the chest with the source of life stood. The Lich was desperately trying to recover because he realized that if he did nothing he would die. But he had no chance. In the next instant, the Pterodrone knight destroyed the chest where his life source was stored. The elder Lich immediately howled in pain. This was the end of him. With painful screams, he and his army immediately began to disappear. Yu watched with a happy smile as his enemies dissolved into thin air. All he could say at that moment was that they had managed to win. But that wasn't all. After all, in addition to the victory, they got a lot of valuable trophies that Pterodrones brought to our hero. Seeing this, he immediately praised and thanked them. His praise immediately caused embarrassment to most of the army. But the surprises did not end there, because suddenly Pterodrone Knight brought him also a large chest, which in the next moment became even bigger. Looking inside, Yu was pleasantly surprised at what he saw. Inside was a blade that seemed very valuable at first glance. The description said that it was called the Royal Seal of the Estrom Kingdom. It had a unique class and added 5 points to mental health, as well as a trait called Conqueror's Charisma. After reading this, our hero was surely convinced that it was the Estrom Mountain, as he had assumed. His first thought was to find the owner of the sword. However, after a little thought, he realized that most likely he had long since died. So Yu put the blade in his backpack and said that he would take care of it later. After all, right now he still had to fulfill the second condition to reduce the status of the Lich's influence. That was to clean up the infected land. Together with an army of Pterodrones, he immediately began to pour the tainted earth into a basin. As he brought it back to his forest, he was delighted to note that it had cleansed as he had intended. Suddenly a Pterodrone knight flew up to him, holding ink in his paws. Yu was a little surprised and asked if he wanted him to write the scroll. He wanted to reply that he couldn't write it without the runes, but the runes that appeared on the tree in time left him no choice. After a while, he was already sitting and writing a scroll of purification. It was supposed to restore the infected land to its original state. But even though he had made the scroll, he still had questions about how to use it. But suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by Biam jumping on top of him. The pet was trying to show him that he wanted his attention. While our hero was babysitting Biam and telling him to be careful, as the infection could harm him, the Pterodrone's knight decided to take matters into his own hands. He immediately tore out the page with the inscriptions. After a while, our hero finally finished playing with Biam. Surprised that it was very quiet, he looked around. Not seeing any Pterodrone, he wondered where they had gone. Somewhere in the mountains, terrifying curses began to be heard again. Some Lich had once again raised an army of undead from their graves and began to create havoc. The people at the mountain temple could not understand what was going on, and why they were hearing strange voices. However, they soon realized that they had encountered nothing but a monster of a monstrous level. Surrounded by an army of undead, another elder Lich began to infect and destroy everything in its path. He would have continued to wreak havoc had it not been for the portal that suddenly appeared behind him. In the next instant, the Lich was confronted with a truly terrifying foe. A Pterodrone knight stood before him at full height. He was not only huge in size, but also very angry. Realizing that there would be no agreement, the Lich immediately ordered his warriors to attack and destroy this cursed race of the World Tree. Stop them at all costs. But it didn't work out so well. After all, it only took one blow to destroy half of his army. The Lich was no easy task. While the enemy was distracted by his warriors, he managed to cast a spell. The very next moment, a curse fell on Pterodrone. However, as it turned out, it was of no use. The Pterodrone looked at the Lich with a mocking gaze, as if to say that techniques of that level did not work on him. The Lich was scared to death and shocked, as he didn't understand why his curse had no effect. But he had no time to wonder and understand the situation, because he had bigger problems to deal with. Namely, the huge army of Pterodrones that had suddenly appeared from the portal, and which was clearly determined to turn him and his army into dust. Around this time, Yu was standing behind the counter of his store as usual. As long as there were no visitors, he could afford to fondle Biam. However, their pastime was disturbed by a visitor who entered the store. It was Huang Sunyoung who headed towards him in a hurry. After approaching the counter and grabbing the remote, she immediately turned on the TV. Immediately, the voice of the anchor came on and said that they had breaking news. The reporter who had arrived on the scene excitedly reported that there were signs of battle in the areas where the Lich had been. In addition, the infested lands had been cleared. The officials also commented on this, saying that it could only mean that all the Lich had been destroyed. Listening to the news, Yu couldn't help but wonder what had happened. However, the very next moment, he received the answer to his question. The reporter said that they had managed to capture a previously unknown task creature at the scene. According to the experts, it could have been disaster level or even destruction level. However, no more information could be obtained, as the creature disappeared as quickly as it appeared. After watching the news, Yu immediately wondered what his Terradrones were doing there. At the same time, Kim Hyun-suk, who had also watched the news, noted that the unknown creature was not the level of destruction. Seo Hye-jin, on the other hand, concluded that it was a mythical level monster, while Cha Hua-yeon was only puzzled as to what was even going on. At about the same time, a dark and frightening shadow loomed over the small and frightened Terradrones. However, it could only seem so, for Yu was not really angry at them for their willfulness. Turning to the Terradrones, our hero said that they should talk it over. Leaving their leader to fend for himself, the rest of the Terradrones immediately ran away. Yu wasn't going to scold them, and told them not to be afraid because they hadn't done anything wrong. However, he still had questions about whether they were the ones who had ripped out the scroll and the ones who had appeared in Jirisan and destroyed all the Lich. Without answering anything, the Terradrone knight ran off somewhere. However, a moment later he came back, but not empty-handed. In front of Yu immediately appeared a large pile of ether stones and essence, which sparkled brightly in the sun. However, our hero didn't need a bribe. All he wanted to hear was whether they were the ones who had appeared in the city. Still feeling guilty for what he had done, the Terradrone knight nodded guiltily in response. He expected punishment, but there was none. Gently stroking him, Yu said that he wasn't trying to intimidate them, but just wanted to confirm and make sure that they really did it. Without stopping stroking, our hero said with a bright smile that they had done an excellent job of cleansing Jiri-san. The misunderstanding had been cleared up, but the pile of ether stones and essences had gone nowhere. Looking at them, Yu couldn't help but wonder what he was supposed to do with them. As if nothing had happened, he picked up a stone that was worth millions of dollars and noted that they had received it for defeating the Elder Lich. Biam, who hadn't shown any signs of interest before, suddenly meowed and reached for the stone. Yu saw this and asked if he wanted to play with it. Handing him the stone, which I will remind cost millions of dollars, our hero said that he could take it. However, as it turned out, he was not going to play with the crystal. Having received what he wanted, Biam immediately began to chew on it. Watching him happily eat the stone, Yu wondered if this was the source of their energy. He immediately thought that perhaps that was why the Terradrones had taken the stones and brought them to him. Finally finished eating, Biam meowed contentedly. Now our hero was finally convinced that he was a nature god, as their behavior was beyond common sense. However, he didn't dwell on it, as he still had 15 essence stones that he was going to spend on improving his characteristics. The first thing he decided to improve was his strength and stamina. As he used the stones, he felt a warm energy begin to spread through his body. Deciding to see if anything had changed, he waved his hand. The main reason why he decided to improve his strength was because he was a worker. Stroking Biam, Yu told himself that he shouldn't be obsessed with getting stronger. He should just be happy with what he already had. After all, it was enough for him. Chasing power would not bring him joy. After a while, our hero received a call from the Hunter Control Center. They reported that they needed a dungeon latecomer. Immediately, he agreed without a second thought. He was very excited and enthusiastic, as he had never been to a real dungeon latecomer party before. Yu soon arrived at the place where the other participants were gathering. Since there were quite a few people gathered there, he figured that the dungeon probably had to be huge. Suddenly, a man called out to him. He greeted our hero and said that they hadn't seen each other for quite some time. Yu immediately recognized the man. It was his old acquaintance, Mr. Wanho. The man couldn't contain his excitement, as this was the first time he had attended the opening of a dungeon of this level. Yu also said that he had never seen so many people at a latecomer party before. Putting his arm around our hero's shoulders, Mr. Wanho said that this time they might even be able to find something good, to which Yu replied that he didn't think they would ever get such a chance. However, the man still believed in the best. While he was saying something caught our hero's attention. The sound of someone's heels clacking was heard nearby. The owner was Seo Hye-jin, who had just returned from the dungeon. She immediately attracted the gazes of everyone present. She was beautiful enough that when she appeared, everyone started talking about her. While someone was saying that they had heard that she had once again completed the quest alone, Seo Hyejin suddenly noticed Yu. She immediately headed towards him. Not understanding what was going on, he stared at her in bewilderment. After greeting our hero, she asked if he had come here to enter with the other latecomers. He nodded affirmatively, adding that he had gotten a call that they were short on people. While they were talking, the others present watched in amazement. There was no way they expected Tot to talk to some guy first. Hearing this, Seo immediately had a thought in her head. It could be dangerous out there. She herself didn't know why she suddenly felt the urge to suggest it. With an awkward smile, she asked if he would be sorry if she went along with him. She immediately added that if he went to the dungeon with her, he would be able to move around freely and not worry about anything. Yu didn't mind such company, but he was a little embarrassed that they were now the focus of everyone's attention. Once the others saw that Seo Hyejin was talking to some ordinary guy, they too decided to try their luck. As they approached her, they started to offer her to go with them. Someone even offered her all the authority regarding the dungeon. Everyone was so focused on getting her favor that they didn't pay any attention to our hero, who just stood there silently. But Seo wasn't going to accept anyone's offer, and she didn't need anyone's help either. All their attempts to interest her were in vain. She was only interested in one person here, Jiha. Ignoring the others, she smilingly told Yu to follow her, to which he nodded a little confused. Yu and Seo Hyejin were walking through a dungeon that looked very much like a forest. Turning to our hero, she told Seo that she had heard that rare plants could be found in such dungeons, to which he replied that many people actually passed by without knowing about it. Since they could hardly find anything worthwhile on the surface, she suggested going deeper. Yu was completely fine with that, but something in his backpack suddenly started moving. As it turned out, it was Biam, who was finding it hard to sit in the stuffy backpack. As soon as Seo saw it, her eyes immediately lit up with the desire to pet the beautiful creature. Calling it very cute, she reached out to pet it. However, she was immediately rejected. While the girl was saddened by her failure, Yu explained that he didn't like being held by his front paws. Seo pouted a little and noted that he was really cranky. Biam, who didn't want to sit in the backpack, immediately started trying to break free. The green grass and fresh air beckoned to him. Finally, having freed himself, he jumped to the ground. Squatting down and watching the cat with interest, Seo noticed that he had gotten a little bigger since the last time she had seen him. Petting Biam, Yu replied that it was because of the rather expensive food he was feeding him. After thinking for a bit, he decided that it would be best not to tell her that last time he had eaten a stone that was worth about 1 billion won. Since everyone was ready, Seo Hyejin suggested that they move out immediately. After all, their adventure was just beginning. As they continued their journey through the forest, the girl asked Yu if he had seen the news yesterday. He asked what kind of news she was talking about. Seo Hyejin replied that it was about a mythical-level monster called Pterodrone. Her words made our hero a little nervous, but he managed to hold back his emotions and pretend that nothing happened. Seo continued, saying that she had even heard that the government had managed to find traces of giants in the Busan Ant dungeon. Listening to the girl's words, Yu thought that the Devil Ants dungeon sounded very familiar. After thinking for a bit, he was able to remember his attempts to cosplay Eren. As Seo Hyejin continued to talk about how that dungeon was closed because of the danger, Yu chuckled nervously in his head, because he was the giant. Although he was surprised to hear this, he had already guessed that his miniature world was connected to the dungeons of the real world. Suddenly Yu had to interrupt his thoughts as Biam, who was walking ahead of everyone, stopped abruptly and adopted a fighting stance. Not understanding what caused this behavior of the cat, our hero asked what happened. In the next instant, Seo grabbed her sword. Turning to Yu, she told him in a grim voice to go back immediately. Taking out her sword, she stood in front of their small group. A cold breeze blew in their direction, which did not bode well. And so it was, for in the next instant Seo was seized by a horrible but painfully familiar sensation. Just as before, the monsters that appeared in front of them were animated trees. Even though they were quite a distance away, their lust for killing and madness could still be felt very clearly. Turning his gaze to the girl, Yu noticed the sword in her hands began to tremble. He immediately asked if she was all right. Seo wasn't fine. She knew she had to do something. But her body froze in place and refused to listen to her. In a trembling voice, she said that it was the same place where Seung-hyuk disappeared. Yu had already heard that Han Seung-hyuk, a hunter of the first rank, had disappeared in one of the dungeons. And if it was the same dungeon, then the rank of this place had to be at least rank 5. Pulling their roots out of the ground, the monsters began to advance. The next moment, the sound of a potion bottle being opened was heard. After controlling her fear and coming to her senses, Seo drank the potion. After that, she resolutely stood up and told our hero to run to the entrance of the dungeon with Biom. She herself was determined to clean up the place. You could see her determination. However, the problem was that even she wouldn't be able to deal with so many high-rank monsters. But as it turned out, the mood to fight wasn't just Seo's. Biom, exuding a blue aura, also resolutely stared at the monsters. In the next instant, he rushed straight towards them without paying any attention to the shouts of the protagonist who tried to stop him. However, what happened next shocked you very much. For just like last time, the monsters who saw Biom also started to run away. One of the tree monsters didn't manage to do so, because the cat caught up with him very quickly. Grabbing one of the monster's limbs, Biom was able to tear it off without much effort. The monster lost his arm and howled in pain. The fingers of the severed limb had some seeds on them, which came off with it. Since Biom only stopped at the monster's arm and didn't pursue it, the monster immediately ran away while screaming. Yu and Seo were watching with their mouths wide open the whole time. The cat came back to them as if nothing had happened. Yu saw that the cat was carrying something in its mouth and leaned towards it. Holding a seed in his mouth, Biom looked at our hero with shining eyes, as if trying to say that he had brought it for him. Guessing this, our hero took the seed. Turning to the cat, he asked if the cat wanted him to plant it. Biom nodded affirmatively. Seo was watching the monsters run away. She had never seen a monster of such a high level run away from someone in fear. Taking Biom in his arms, Yu turned to her and said that they had more important problems right now, namely the deeper places in the dungeon that smelled of danger. After all, the monsters they had just encountered were only a small part of the dangers that could be waiting for them. Seo Hyejin understood this very well. She didn't want to involve her companions in all this, so she again told our hero to go back with Biom. Yu looked at the girl with a puzzled look and asked about her plans. Tears appeared in Seo's eyes. With desperation in her voice, she replied that she couldn't just leave like that, because she had already managed to find a small clue, so she decided that no matter what, she would continue her search. Yu was really surprised by the girl's determination. Although he had no desire to be in danger, he wasn't going to leave her behind. So holding out a potion to Seo, he said that he would go along with her. The girl did not immediately believe what she heard and looked at Yu in bewilderment. Our hero with a smile added that he understood the danger, but believed that she could protect them. Taking the potion, Seo replied that she would do her best to make sure they could return home. During their journey, evening had come. However, they had no intention of stopping. They continued to travel further and further. At one point, Seo suddenly stopped Yu. Pointing at something ahead of them, she asked if he saw the same thing she did. Looking closer, our hero saw a cave that seemed to have a light coming from it. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but they could only hope that the answer they needed was inside the cave. The best and only way to find out what was in the cave was to go and check it out. So after a while, our heroes stood at the entrance. After shining the torch inside, Yu noted that there was no contamination inside the cave. Once inside, they began to look around carefully. Suddenly, Seo excitedly told our hero to look forward. As he got closer, he saw a distinct trail of blood that stretched inside. Realizing that this could be the clue they were looking for, Yu immediately said firmly that they should keep moving. Cautiously moving through the cave, our heroes tried to find any clues. Luckily, after a while, Seo shouted excitedly and stared at something ahead of them. On the ground lay someone's broken sword, as well as a very shabby armor. From their condition, it was safe to say that their owner had had a hard time. The girl immediately recognized these things. She immediately fell to her knees in despair. Hugging the armor, the girl began to cry. Our hero immediately tried to calm her down, saying that there was still a chance that her appa was alive. Taking her by the shoulders, he said that since the marks were only at the entrance, could it mean that he was able to heal and leave? Hearing this, she tearfully asked if it could really be so, to which our hero nodded affirmatively. Suddenly, Biom approached them and tried to get their attention. Seeing this, Yu was surprised and asked what he was doing. However, as it turned out, he wasn't trying to play as he normally would. In its mouth was some kind of green ball that shone with a bright light. As soon as the ball was in the hands of our hero, the system reported that it was a symbiote egg. Looking at the egg thoughtfully, Yu thought that he had already heard about it somewhere. So to be sure, he decided to check the information once they got back. His thoughts were disturbed by Biom, who suddenly bit his hand. Looking at him, Yu immediately realized that he wanted to be praised. After petting him, our hero said that he had done a good job and had really done a good job. Petting the cat was a good thing, but they were in a dungeon where they shouldn't linger. Since they had found the footprints, they could be sure that not all was lost yet. After Yu's words, Seo had a glimmer of hope. Smiling happily, she said that she would definitely keep searching until she found it. Since they had managed to find clues and fulfill their original plan, she offered to go back. Standing at the exit of the dungeon, Seo sincerely thanked Yu for his help, to which he smiled awkwardly and replied that he had done almost nothing to receive praise. However, the girl didn't see it that way. Cradling the armor to herself, she replied that it was only because of him that they were able to find the traces of Sungyuk Oppa. After which, smiling brightly, she stated that she was always lucky to be around him. Hearing that, Yu was a little embarrassed. Byum, on the other hand, was watching the situation with contempt. Breaking the awkward silence, Seo said that he could ask her for help any time. Shaking her hand, Yu replied that he would definitely do so. Byum watched this with obvious displeasure. The next moment, he tried to separate their hands. However, Seo's affection went to him as well. She stroked the cat and said that she was grateful for his help too. Since it was already late, Yu suggested that they split up right there. After all, he still had to give his pet a snack. But besides that, he had one more important thing to do. One that he absolutely had to do. After returning back to the store, Yu immediately started searching for information about the symbiote egg. Flipping through another book, he told himself that he was sure he had already read about it somewhere. Sitting on the pile of books, Byum watched his master, who had been staring at the book for hours. He didn't really like it, as he was eager to play. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he immediately jumped into the pile of books. Looking at the joyful Byum sitting in the pile of books, Yu laughed. Taking the book off his head, Yu said brokenly that he didn't think he would find anything in this book. And so the only option was to try and find out about the egg in the dream world. So he waved goodbye to Byum and said that they would see each other there. The next moment, he was already immersed in the dream world. Soon he found himself in his garden in the forest as usual. He was very happy to experience the refreshing sensation of nature after so many hours of reading books. However, suddenly something surprised our hero very much. Puzzled, he looked at the tree and wondered if it had always been so big. However, the surprises did not end there. On the branches of the tree, he found some fruit. According to the information the system provided, they were the fruits of the world tree. Yu was surprised. How could he not think that this was indeed a world tree? The very next moment, something caught his attention again. As it turned out, it was the pterodrones that greeted him cheerfully. While Byum started to try to use them as toys, Yu started to take out an egg from his bag. Showing it to the pterodrone, he asked if they happened to know what it was. To his surprise, the pterodrone knight immediately nodded affirmatively, as if to say he knew what to do with it. Our hero was very happy about this, because he had already tried everything to find out something. The next moment, the system sent a notification that the pterodrone knight was offering him an egg to hatch. Yu immediately agreed and immediately gave it to him. After taking the egg, the pterodrone began dragging it somewhere. Yu was now one less thing to worry about. Seeing off the procession with a glance, our hero said with a smile that they could be relied on. At the same time, there was a dinner in the nest of pterodrone. Sitting on her throne, the queen was eating the goodies brought to her by the workers. Suddenly, however, a knight appeared carrying an egg. He immediately handed it to the queen. Putting aside all her affairs, she clasped the egg with her paws, while the worker immediately brought the essence crystals. Placing the egg in the center of the egg, they surrounded it with the crystals, while the queen immediately embraced it and began to incubate it. While the pterodrones were doing useful things, Yu was fooling around and babysitting Byum. Byum was only too happy to do so, which made him purr happily. Suddenly, something interrupted their fun. Our heroes immediately stared at the tree, whose trunk was followed by a procession of pterodrones. Moving in a chain like ants, they climbed to the top of the tree. However, as it turned out, they did not rise there for nothing. There was a majestic symbiote moth hovering in the air above. Seeing this, Yu immediately wondered if it was a symbol. In the next instant, the symbiote spread its wings and soared into the air. A golden glow began to emanate from it and gradually surrounded the tree. In the next instant, a dazzling bright white light illuminated everything around it. Soon, it disappeared, and everything seemed to return to its normal rhythm of life. However, something had changed. While our hero was admiring the tree, the system sent him a notification that a group of sleeping symbiotes had awakened. And now, as he approached the giant greenish tree, he touched it to feel its power. What a relief that the tree was now healthy and full of energy. To his surprise, it didn't end there, and he felt a pleasant light feeling as if a warm summer breeze was blowing on all sides of him and trying to lift him up. Everything around him was drowned in rainbow light, and one notice appeared after another. The world tree bestows its blessing upon him. Now, with the blessing of the tree, his dormant destiny has been awakened, and his class had once again changed, and he was now the world tree's worker. Filled with new power, our hero decided to take a walk in the surrounding forest, where it was impossible not to notice the changes. The awakening of the world tree seemed to have affected the entire forest, which was now just alive with new life and golden fruits everywhere. Jiha couldn't contain his admiration as he looked at them. Now this world from his dreams had become even more fabulous. He couldn't stop exclaiming, "No way!" as he strolled through the renewed forest where life was booming. And even Biome found something to do there. The fish just overflowed the local river and constantly jumped out of it, becoming an easy prey for the cat. But it didn't end there. The forest became bigger and wider, which our hero couldn't be happy about. He did not understand how the trees became so big in an instant. And the sun apples, also to keep up with the forest and the trees on which they grew, raised their level, and now they were of the second level. Jiha's happiness was unbounded, as he could now make twice as many potions as before thanks to this large number of high-level sun apples. For a moment, he even thought that he could become rich by selling this mountain of potions to the hunters. It was only for a moment, and he dismissed it almost immediately, explaining that money wasn't really his first priority. And the far more important reason was to find out why the World Tree had given him this chance. Perhaps it was because he had some hidden, dormant destiny, one that relied on the World Tree to bring the whole world back together. Maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't, but one thing he was sure of was that he would find out soon enough. He was brought out of his musings by Biome. He tried to get his attention by meowing loudly. Yu immediately realized what was going on. Cats only meowed so insistently when they were hungry. This misunderstanding had to be corrected immediately, so he opened his big backpack to get a suitable tool from there. And like a brave and stupid Balin, he pulled out a fishing rod, deciding that today was a good day for fishing. Today, he expected to catch a red trout for lunch. Biome was thrilled with the idea and kept trying to catch a trolling rod ahead of the trout. Yu started fishing, and like a professional fisherman, he waited patiently. Biome followed his example and also waited for the fish. Finally, their labors paid off, and they hooked a big fish, which was still struggling to jump out of the water. When Yu got it out of the water, he and his cat were over the moon, rejoicing like little children. But in this forest of dreams, everything was unusual, and this fish was one of them. Holding it in his hands, he saw a notice above it. It was indeed a red trout, but that wasn't what was interesting. It was that by eating it, one could gain the extrasensory perception skill level 1 for 30 minutes. This skill increased all the senses and reflexes of the caster by 20% for 30 minutes. But in Yu's opinion, the description of this item wasn't sufficient and didn't explain all the details of its effects. Suddenly he had an idea how to fix it and use it to his advantage. So he left the red trout to his cat and decided to rummage through his backpack to confirm his hunches on other items as well. Taking out his dimensional pouch, he carefully read its description from the system, which said that he could store items in it without risk of damaging them. This effect also worked when he entered another dimension. But the other hunters didn't seem to have seen these system descriptions, and his idea was perfect to fix that. This way, he wouldn't have to explain the effects of potions several times to the hunters, and it would save him a lot of time in the future. Yu was shining with happiness and enthusiasm. Joyful, he picked up Biome, who was still trying to enjoy the fish and wished to be left alone, but no one asked his opinion. Yu picked up the cat along with the fish in his teeth and dragged him back home. He couldn't wait to get back to the store and put his great idea into practice. He decided to use his perfect handwriting skill to write beautiful labels explaining the effects of his potions. In just a few days, there was a huge crowd of customers outside his store who couldn't wait to get in. It felt like Black Friday. Some of them didn't even understand how could there be so many people here. Had all the hunters in Seoul gathered here today? His partner assumed that a rank 1 dungeon or something like that had opened up here, but it wasn't like that. And in the midst of the chaos around him, Biome's figure stood out. In his teeth, he carried notes with numbers and handed them out to the people in line. Such service was to everyone's liking, and the hunters gratefully accepted the numbers from him. Seeing such a big queue, one ordinary passerby asked the one at the end of the line what they were all doing here. "What's the sale?" The hunter was surprised by his stupid question and, pointing his finger in the direction of the store, asked him a rhetorical question. What did he think they were doing here? Of course, they're waiting for a chance to buy potions, and he's standing there, even though he doesn't know if it's his turn or not. An ordinary passerby was out of the question and asked him what potions were. The hunter realized that he was just a civilian who didn't know anything at all. Jiha, meanwhile, was forced to put restrictions on sales so that everyone could have enough to buy a little. One person was allowed to buy 3 bottles of potion, but before they could do so, they had to get a ticket with the number in the queue from Biome. 2 potions were especially popular, a paralysis potion and a special health potion. The paralysis potion increased resistance to the effects of paralysis by 35% for 30 minutes, and the special health potion restored 22% of maximum health for 13 seconds. The hunter at the end of the line kept explaining that these potions were made by the owner of this store, and they tasted good and had excellent effects, so even hunters from the nearby neighborhoods came to buy some. On top of that, the price of these potions was as nice as their taste. Biam seemed to enjoy what he was doing and even almost tagged one guy in line as his territory, making him embarrassed and wondering why it had to happen right in front of him. Biam then returned to his master as if nothing had happened, who knew nothing about his antics, praised him for a job well done. His store was filled with customers every day, and Jiha was happy with how business was going, and even though all he could do was create good potions, he was determined to make full use of the abilities bestowed upon him by the World Tree, and use them not for his own sake, but for everyone's sake. Now he looked forward to the future, hoping he could help many. Customers came to the counter one by one, but Jiha didn't seem tired at all, as he did what he loved to do. He wished each of them a good day and to take care of the task at hand. The time flew by until he was disturbed by his acquaintance. Hwang Sun-young awkwardly walked into the store as usual and greeted Jiha. Our hero immediately noticed her and greeted her cheerfully, even though he didn't expect to see her here. Hui was primarily interested in why there were so many people here. The reason for her visit was the news she had seen in their hunting community, and she decided to show Yu right away. Everyone there was talking about some incredible store that was a sanctuary of rare yet affordable potions for all comers, and she decided to come and see it for herself, just in case. What was her surprise when it turned out to be Jiha's store? Such fame even made our hero a little embarrassed. Looking at all the customers with number tickets, Hwang Sun-young sweetly asked if she had to get a number to meet our hero too. Yu assured her that of course not. Happy Hunters members could come outside of the line, and he would always be happy to see them, especially her. Taking one of the health restoration potions and looking at the label, she wondered if what it said was true. It was the first time she had ever seen the effects of a potion so beautifully and accurately written down as they were here. Yu assured her that everything written on the label was true, because he had asked the hunters who had used his potions and they had confirmed it. Hwang Sun-young was mesmerized by the color and consistency of the potion, and as she read over its effects, she was surprised at how much better the potion's performance was than the potions from other stores. They couldn't even be compared. She liked the potions so much that she wanted to buy more than the limit, arguing that she was a regular customer and she was allowed to. But Yu was strict and principled about it and wouldn't let her. But instead he prepared another surprise for her, which she was looking forward to. From under the counter he pulled out a scroll and offered her in return a service for regular customers and a bonus in the form of a scroll. Unrolling the scroll, she noticed that it looked a little sloppy, but it was still beautifully written. The question that remained was what was the effect of using this scroll. Jiha explained that these charms brought good luck. It was a wish creation scroll that allowed 2 small wishes to come true. He thought that he was a little worried about her, since this was the first time he had given this scroll to someone, but in theory, there shouldn't be any problems with such a simple scroll. Hwang Sun-young immediately decided to try it out, and of course wished for a rare old book. But then nothing happened, and she thought it was defective, but she decided to keep it with her as a souvenir. After a while, she went on a dungeon mission with a squad from her guild. The battle was in full swing, and the flying toothfish were flying from the blows in different directions. After one of the strikes, the monster fish flew farther away than usual. It flew straight at an unsuspecting gawker in a hovering trajectory. Hwang Sun-young, who froze in place and didn't move in the face of the threat. The fish was already long dead, but still its weight was enough to crush the poor girl, who thought she was going to die from the tooth of the horrible monster, and did not hesitate to scream. The hunter who had launched the fish at her started apologizing. He didn't even notice what he had done at first. Then another guy from their squad asked the swordsman why he carried a sword, if he was just going to beat his enemies to death. The swordsman apologized that who would have thought that thing would fly so far away. Hwang Sun-young had been lying on the ground unconscious the whole time. She finally came to her senses and stood up, saying she was fine, although she was holding her bruised head. Suddenly the scroll in her pocket lit up, and a system notification appeared that she hadn't seen, that her little wish was about to come true. If she experienced a small setback, the chance of getting special items would increase by 70% for 30 minutes, so the scroll only had one use left. Nothing portended trouble, however. The floor beneath her feet began to crack. The entire dungeon shook, and the group of hunters could barely stay on their feet, not realizing where the earthquake was coming from. In an instant, they were all falling into the abyss that had formed right under their feet. Hwang Sun-young was still trying to grab her precious book, begging everyone and everything to save them, hoping that someone would hear them. However, the hunters were not simple men and managed to group themselves as they fell and landed on their feet. They weren't going to die from such a simple trap. Hwang Sun-young was the only one who landed unluckily and hit her back painfully as usual. She couldn't understand why this kind of mishap was happening to her again and again. With a quick inspection, they found out that it didn't look like a deliberately dug trap, but rather the floor between the two rooms had fallen through. And now to find out where they were trapped, the mage from their group used the spell Guide of Light. Immediately, a golden butterfly appeared, glowing brightly and casting a warm light all around, revealing to the hunters a spacious storage room. In front of them were many treasures, weapons, and armor. To find such things in a dungeon was an unprecedented luck, and they wondered what it all meant. And the big question was, how much was it all worth? The swordsman, of course, first found a nice night troop longsword, and the paladin found cool new armor and assumed this place looked like a secret hideout. It seemed like everyone could find something of interest here. And Hwang Sun-young, of course, noticed an ancient book with a strangely familiar pattern. Realizing what it was, she couldn't believe that it was actually a book that belonged to the Black Lion Knight troop of the Gimark Empire. For a bookworm like her, this was a true treasure. Her wish had finally come true, and now her eyes were shining with happiness. But the paladin interrupted her exuberant joy and told her to be quiet, because this place might fall apart again, so they should all grab what they needed and leave quickly. They made sure to quickly grab what they needed and leave, heading up to the top again. As soon as they all got to the previous floor, a second earthquake started. It seemed that they were in danger as soon as they got any items. Their squad leader lost patience and ordered them all to stop fussing like fools. It would be suicide to go further into the dungeon, so they came to a mutual decision that they should go back now, and that would be the best option. But the trouble did not want to let them go so easily, and when they were not far from the exit of the dungeon behind them, they heard the noise of a chase. It turned out that they were being chased by a huge swarm of fish-like flying creatures that they had already encountered at the beginning of their journey into the dungeon. However, there were too many of them now, and they were left with only one option: run. Run as fast as they had ever run in their lives to save their own skin. The hunters were scared and didn't look after Hwang Sun-young, who had never been a good sprinter and was the last to run. She wouldn't have been able to escape if it hadn't been for a fortunate incident that scared her to death. It was the first time she had ever seen such a creature. A huge scolopendra broke through the wall and caught the whole pack that was chasing the hunting party and became the prey of a bigger predator. The scolopendra wasn't interested in humans at all, but they didn't know that. Scared by the creature's power, the hunters only had time to cover themselves from the dust and small stones that the scolopendra's movements raised. The old building could not withstand such interference, and everything around it shook like another earthquake. The ceiling and walls began to collapse, and large blocks of stone fell all around the confused hunters who were huddled together. Hwang Sun-young cried out in desperation, "Godark, please save me. I don't want to die here." Her tearful pleas continued for a while longer, and she was even afraid to open her eyes, since everywhere was already completely quiet, too quiet. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the confused faces of her friends. They didn't understand what had happened and how they were alive and why it was so bright. It turned out that the scolopendra had created a hole in the wall, through which the bright sunlight penetrated into the dungeon. The hunters had no idea what had happened. What was the ruins and desert around them, and where was the portal through which they had entered this dungeon? What the hell was going on in this world? But there was no one to answer their questions in this desolate place, and puzzled and angry, they tiredly wandered through the desert in search of the portal. Meanwhile, Jiha was having a pleasant time in his forest watching the scolopendras that plumped up the ground for him. They seemed like small creatures to him, but in this world, scale was always deceiving. Yu was glad that thanks to these earthworms, the soil in this forest would become very fertile, and Biom, of course, confirmed with a joyous meow. While our hero was wondering what he should have planted here in the first place, Biom was already rummaging through his backpack looking for the right item. Soon he brought his master a seed that he had gotten by killing an infected plant in the dungeon they were in with Xiao Hiejin. So when Yu saw the seed, he immediately thought of the horrible toothy flower that would grow from it, and was not happy about the prospect. Just in case, he asked his kitty if he really wanted them to plant it, and Bayam seemed to be 100% sure of what he wanted. He was even the first to start digging a hole for the planting while Yu was still questioning whether or not he should do it. After all, it looked a bit dangerous. But Bayam was persistent and quickly managed to dig the hole. He meowed carefree, hinting our hero to hurry up and not to worry. Well, he wasn't going to be stubborn. After all, Biom had gotten the seed himself, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. Who was he to get in his way? When the job was done, he asked the cat if he was happy now, to which he heard an affirmative meow. While he was having a nice time in the forest planting plants, he had some very persistent visitors in the real world, and the bells immediately notified him with a chime. Jiha was surprised that someone had come to the store, even though it was officially closed at this time. He lifted the happy Biom above him. He asked him if they should return to the store. Now that everything was planted, he of course didn't mind. When they returned, Yu started scrubbing the dirty kitty who was covered in mud from working with the soil and resisting as best he could. He even seemed to have forgotten why he had come back to the store. But the noise outside the window quickly reminded him of that. The group of hunters didn't understand why Huang Sunyang had dragged them here and why she was so angry. They were all tired after traveling and were covered in mud as much as Biom. Yu hurriedly opened the door for them and was surprised at how they all looked. Huang Sunyang was barely caught in time to keep her from attacking our hero with her fists. She was so eager to punch the bastard who had slipped her some sort of bad luck curse under the guise of a good luck charm. Yu was surprised to notice that the system description of the scroll had expanded to say that if the user of the scroll experienced a minor setback, the chance of getting special items would increase by 70% for 30 minutes. That was an important clarification that changed everything. But it would be suicidal to explain all this to her now, so he decided to give her time to cool down and suggested that the whole group go inside and wash up first. After the shower, they all felt better, and the paladin even said that he could live now that he had gotten rid of all that dirt. While his girlfriend could not admire the cute cat, who, however, was not so good inside and refused to accept any caress from her and defiantly turned away. Now it was time to ask them what had happened. The paladin was the first to start by briefly saying that they had entered the Viper dungeon, but suddenly earthworms appeared and completely destroyed the entire dungeon. Hearing their story, Yu wondered if this incident was the price for using the Scroll of Wish creation. The only relief among all was that they had found some secret hideout, but being there they had lost too much time and risked staying there forever. Yu was surprised that they had found the secret hideout of the night troop, but he was even more surprised when Huang Sunyang told him what kind of knights they were. It was the secret hideout of the Black Lion Night Troop. Yu really wanted to know more, and he clarified if she was talking about the Black Lion Night Troop of Gimark Empire. Yes, she was talking about them. Moreover, she even had something that would make him lose his mind, and it was that item right in her backpack. It was this ancient book with an engraved gold lion on a black background. Turns out it was the Night Troop commander's logbook, an invaluable treasure for knowledgeable bookworms. There was only one problem. Everything in this book was in an ancient language, so Huang Sunyang couldn't read most of it. Fortunately for our hero, thanks to the skills granted by the World Tree, he could read everything without any problems. And it all started when the monsters that had appeared in the Estrom Kingdom started to cross the border. She was surprised that he could read it all, and he confirmed that it was no problem for him. So she took out a dusty map from her backpack and said that if he could read it, he must know what it was. It turned out to be a damaged map of the continent of Gehenna. This was an unprecedented treasure for our hero, and it seemed that he had been lucky enough to have gotten it from the very beginning of this story without any scrolls, as he had too many convenient coincidences in his life. Huang Sunyang even doubted that the card was real, but Yu assured her that he was sure of it. Then our hero had a brilliant idea of what he could do with the card. He immediately took his friend by the hand and with all his charm asked for one favor. "Could you lend me this map just for a few days?" In return, he offered her squad a whole case of first-rate potions. Would he really give them all of this for nothing? A bargain of unprecedented generosity. Looking at the potions, the hunters asked her to lend the card to our hero without a second thought. She just had to lend it for such a gift. Deciding to finally convince everyone, Yu offered them, because they liked his potions so much, extra potions for a whole month. Of course they agreed, assuring him that he was a great guy, but once the deal was made, he wouldn't be able to cancel it. That wasn't a problem for our hero. He had plenty of potions. While Huang Sunyang's hunters were trying to drag Huang Sunyang away from her precious book and map, as they thought it was just plain paper junk that they had gotten a week's supply of potions for, Yu waved goodbye to them and wished them to be safe. He himself suddenly needed to do a lot of things because of this map book, especially if he wanted to make a stock of potions for business and read the Night Troop commander's logbook. Just as Biom was already starting to fall asleep, and they should be heading back to the Forest of Dreams. Returning to the store and getting comfortable, our hero decided that he could prepare the potions after he went to his garden. But before doing so, he wanted to check the map that Huang Sunyang had lent him. Since it was a map of the Knights of the Empire, Its detail and quality had to be at a high level. It was, even the landscape, place names and monsters that appeared were recorded in great detail. Examining the map, he came to the conclusion that the elder lich that appeared in Jirisan came from the southern part of the Estrum Palace, and the monster forest that Hyejin and he went to was near Mount Apeto. If the map was complete and undamaged, he would be able to find out where all the dungeons where the monsters appeared from were located. And then he had another obvious idea on how he could find out more. All he had to do was ask the Terradrones. They were bound to know something. Hoping so, he finally fell asleep, once again going to his dream world. As always, he found himself near the world tree in the forest and stretched out sweetly, enjoying the warm weather and the birdsong. Baeom did not deny himself the pleasure of stretching. But this time something was strange. The surroundings were empty. No one had met them. And Yu wondered where all the Terradrones had gone. Everything came to a head when the bells rang out in full force, warning him that a strong monster had appeared in this area. At first, Jiha didn't even believe that the monster was here since it was calm and safe before. But the approaching evil energy and the sounds of battle quickly dispelled all his doubts. In the middle of the clearing stood a cyclops with a club in his hands, exuding its ominous aura. However, the Terradrones were not idle and had already surrounded the uninvited guest. Of course, our hero in the dream world was much bigger than the Cyclops, but still he was surprised to see him here. Until now, he had only heard of such a monster. The Cyclops is a disaster-grade monster that first appeared in China. Not much is known about it other than its size and appearance, but it was said that dozens of hunters were sent out to catch it, and they didn't quite succeed. The Cyclops has never been seen in Korea until today. He was actively swinging his club at the advancing Terradrones. Knowing the threat level of the Cyclops, our hero was surprised that Baeom was not going to help in its elimination, completely entrusting everything to the small Terradrones. And judging by the fact that no information windows appeared, the Terradrones were doing fine on their own without any help. They used wooden shields and continued to advance on the Cyclops. Just in case, Yu decided to record what was happening on the battlefield so that he could better know the strengths and weaknesses of the Cyclops in the future. Meanwhile, the Terradrone warrior led his army with shields forward. He successfully dodged the Cyclops mace and was already approaching the Cyclops eye, about to pierce it with his sharp horn. But it wasn't that simple, and dark energy began to gather around the eye. Jiha only had time to shout, "Watch out!" when the Cyclops shot out a deadly beam of dark energy that barely caught and threw the Terradrone warrior off. The beam was so powerful it swept away everything in its path: trees, rocks, Terradrones. It was an ultimatum weapon, and it seemed that at this point the Terradrones had nothing to counter such power. The scratched warrior managed to retreat to the others despite the damage. And it looked like he wasn't going to give up at all and ordered something in his language to the others. Did they have a plan? At their general's orders, the rank and file Terradrones brought a large stone of ether from their supplies and threw it directly to him. With quick movements, he chopped it into smaller pieces that were shaped like shields. He did not forget himself, leaving a larger piece for himself. The entire Terradrone's army was now protected by the new ether shields. They used them to build a wall of shields that shone under the sun's rays. However, it didn't change anything for Cyclops, and he was going to wipe out those insolent bugs with his next salvo. The Cyclops took precise aim and fired. Yu himself couldn't believe that the Terradrones were intentionally going to be directly hit by this deadly beam of light, but it seemed like they were really confident in their new shields. When the beam hit the shields then, our protagonist immediately realized their plan and was pleasantly surprised by their cleverness. The Terradrones used their shields as reflectors to repel the attack, and even more so, they used the enemy's weapons against themselves. They aimed the Cyclops beam at his own arm and severed it along with the club. The hand, even when it hit the ground, was still clutching the club with a dead grip, and Jiha did not miss the opportunity to colorfully describe it in his book. He summarized that when dealing with a Cyclops, the key strategy was to reflect its light rays with a shield made of ether stones. Now that the Cyclops was disarmed, the Terradrones rushed back into the attack led by their commander. Cyclops at this time forgot about everything in the world, screamed in pain, and tried to run away. But no one let him escape, of course. A few precise blows on his legs and knees, and his escape was quickly over. The Cyclops collapsed with a crash, raising dust. Our hero rejoiced as if he had defeated the Cyclops himself, shouting, "They did it! They defeated a Cyclops!" A squad of Terradrones took to the air and flew closer to greet and salute their master. As they approached, they all saluted him like real soldiers of his own army. Yu was happy that they did well and praised them, telling them that they were really tough guys. Baeom was in complete agreement with him. For working so hard, he couldn't help but reward them. so he decided to give them a whole mountain of yellow goodies, as well as dozens of ether stones. Everyone was happy, and even Biom got a reward even though he didn't want to help. However, their fun was interrupted by a sudden notification from the system. When he opened it, he saw many notifications that 10 essence units had arrived on his account. Our hero didn't understand where it all came from and why it was a reward. In the end, he received as much as 325 units of essence. It turned out that his entries in the Endless Book of Laws were behind all of this, which then went straight to Mirwiki. Chahwa-yun was sitting in her office, and while browsing the news, she noticed that something new had appeared on Mirwiki. When she clicked on the new article, she was surprised to find that she had to spend 10 essence to read it. And then she could read the article on Cyclops' core strategy. This was the first time she had seen this kind of system and didn't know when it had appeared. However, to her, a measly 10 essence was worthless, because she could earn that much very quickly just by walking around a few dungeons. Therefore, she boldly confirmed her request. She started reading, and noticed that the Cyclops was swinging his club and had only one eye from which he shot deadly rays of light. She was interested in reading and wondered what was next and what was the key to defeating the Cyclops. But when she reached a certain point, an annoying system window appeared in front of her again, asking for 10 more units of essence to see the final strategy for defeating the Cyclops. That's when she grabbed her head and started banging her head against the keyboard, screaming that she didn't have any more essence. How she wanted to find that damn bastard who had published that post and let him see and feel it. How she would fry him to a crisp. Oh yes, he deserves it. Meanwhile, our hero suspected nothing and was having a great time relaxing in his forest of dreams. Suddenly, some ominous feeling woke him up and made him feel in danger. The next day, Kim Hyun-suk arrived at work in the morning as usual and unsuspectingly headed to the office. However, when he entered the lobby, he was immediately surprised by the noise and the number of hunters gathered there. He hurriedly asked the assistant if there were any events scheduled for today that he didn't know about, but the assistant assured him that there were no such events planned. Then the logical question was, why were all these hunters gathered here? What could have made them all gather here so early? The assistant quickly realized what was going on and showed him the news on his phone, saying that it had been published yesterday. Kim Hyun-suk had no idea what the Cyclops core strategy article had to do with this crowd here. Then the assistant explained what had angered the hunters so much in all of this was that it took 10 essence to view the article, but to know the final strategy, another 10 units were needed. Even possessing 10 units of essence greatly increased stats, and such a hunter could be considered quite powerful. But then who could boast of possessing 20 units of essence? Such people were found, and they shared their knowledge with their friends and so on. That was why the crowd of hunters had started gathering here since yesterday's sunset, waiting for the information about the Cyclops dungeons to appear on the interactive map at the Hunters Association headquarters. The assistant didn't know who the author of the article was, but his writing was amazing. Kim Hyun-suk, hearing this, thought that Cyclops dungeons had never appeared in their country before. And since the threat level of Cyclops was at least level 6, it would be difficult for scattered groups of hunters to unofficially pass those dungeons. The assistant confirmed his words, but still added that there were rumors that hunters who read the article would be given a dungeon buff. Suddenly, a shout spread throughout the hall. It really opened! Glowing dots appeared on the screen, indicating the location of the Cyclops dungeons. Realizing what was about to happen, Kim Hyun-suk ordered his assistant to go upstairs and call the intelligence team and the emergency operations center. When everyone gathered for the meeting, the representative of the news agency turned on the presentation and argued that since it was impossible to access the Mirwiki server, it's safe to assume that there's no possibility of foreign intervention. In that case, Hyun-suk Kim asked if they could trace the essence paid to Mirwiki to find who published the article. But he was assured that it was impossible because it is assumed that it automatically belongs to the system provided to hunters. The assistant immediately told the head that he had just received a report on the initial test results, and just like the rumor said, the hunters who read the final strategy received a buff. All of this was giving Kim Hyun-suk a headache. He jumped up from his chair and said, "The Emergency Operations Center needs to put up a list of hunters who've signed up for the mission and monitor them all in real time. The hunters' safety is our top priority." Seo Hye-jin and Cha Hwa-yeon put together a joint team. However, the paladin with the large reflective shield wasn't sure if it would really work with such a lineup. And the Eternal Flame Guild's chief alchemist didn't understand why he had been brought here, while the others were saddened by the loss of so much essence that they had accumulated over many quests. But all their complaints were nothing to Cha Hwa-yeon, for her inner fire of energy and enthusiasm burned as brightly as her magic. Seo Hyojin, on the other hand, was as focused as possible and asked the tankers to stand by until it's time to use the reflective shield according to the strategy. She and Hunter Kyungbaek will enter immediately after the attack is successful. She was going to leave the rest to Cha Hua-yeon to finish off the wounded monster. She was confident in her abilities and advised her not to worry. After all, with this new buff that increased attack power and critical damage by 15%, her fire magic would definitely fry that poor Cyclops to a crisp. It didn't take long for the Cyclops to appear. It met the hunters with its death ray without delay. It was a good thing that their tank had managed to cover everyone with a reflective shield in time, though it wasn't as skilled with a heavy shield as the Terradrones. But that was enough for Seo Hyojin to sneak up from the other side and use her powerful sword rampage skill to deliver a series of swift blows to the Cyclops' legs to bring him to his knees. And Cha Hua-yeon didn't miss her opportunity to hit the Cyclops with a fire meteor. While they were having heated battles, our hero sat at home with his cat and watched the news that the Cyclops dungeons had ended without any catastrophes or casualties among the hunters. Jiha didn't envy them at all, and only rejoiced at their success, praising how great Seo Hyojin and Cha Hua-yeon's fighting skills were. Next, the anchors discussed the news that the Hunter Management Bureau had announced that the strategy for defeating Cyclops published on the Mir Wiki would be shared free of charge with other countries. Thus, our hero now knew for sure that those strategies that he writes in the Endless Spellbook are automatically uploaded to Mir Wiki. Thanks to this, he had already obtained more than 5,000 essences. Now he had a plan to ensure an endless supply of essence. All he had to do was to share Terradrone's attack strategies on Mir Wiki. His little friends turned out to be very smart guys, and they relied not only on their strength, but also on their intelligence. Bells rang, warning him of danger. Was there a monster again? Not a moment's peace. Bayam didn't want to go anywhere, and desperately resisted as Yu tried to drag him away and into his dream forest. But when he woke up, he was not in the forest at all, but on a lonely empty island. And around was the sea, and the sound of the surf, and the small figure of our hero seemed so insignificant. But he was not alone. The Terradrones were here too, and their commander was already flying towards Yu to greet him. Yu extended his hand to show that he too was happy to see his best Terradrone warrior. A notice immediately appeared in front of him that the wounded World Eater needed his help. Yu didn't understand where the creature called World Eater was and looked around fearfully, but he didn't see anything. Finally, he asked Terradrone where the creature was. He immediately pointed downwards. Yu thought the World Eater was underground, but that only raised more questions. Where is it exactly? Maybe inside that little hole? It turned out to be much simpler, and Jiha froze in surprise, especially when a fountain of water came out of that hole. The worst of all was Bayam, who didn't like water at all and was already wet. He hurriedly jumped out of Yu's arms, and immediately began to dry himself, again coating our hero. Now everything was clear. The island on which he was standing turned out to be a whale. World Eater was a huge whale, the size of which was hard to imagine in the real world. Jiha immediately climbed down from its back and stood on a shoal nearby to look at the whale from the side. So this was the legendary World Eater. But judging from his sickly appearance, he wasn't feeling well. Yu could feel the whale's energy weakening. Now our hero understood the reason why he had so much essence in his hands, just for such occasions. He took a whole handful of essence stones and fed them all to the whale, hoping it would be enough to make the ego healthy. Immediately, the whale's eyes widened, either from a surge of energy or pain. Jiha didn't understand what was happening or why the whale was suffering so much. Finally, its pain became too unbearable, and the whale let out a kind of roar as it opened its mouth wide. After that, there was a bright flash of blue light that made Jiha and the whale turn away and cover their ears to avoid getting hurt. The whale's body also shone with a bright light, and it seemed like it had turned into a white spot. But then it was over, and there was silence, broken only by the sound of the surf. Yu and Bayam lay exhaustedly on the sand trying to regain consciousness, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Because a notification from the system appeared in front of our hero that thanks to his help, the World Eater had returned to its original form. What a relief it was for Yu that he had done everything right, and now the whale was better. When he finally tried to stand up, he realized that his head was still spinning, and he was still dizzy. But all that went away when he saw the cuteness in front of him. World Eater had shrunk in size considerably and was now the cutest little whale ever. Yu immediately rushed to hug it, amazed at how cool it was, and so soft. Bayam watched with envy and resentment, jealous of his master who had crossed all boundaries and dared to pet someone other than himself. At last the World Eater sailed off to conquer the endless seas, while Yu watched him say goodbye. Now he was sure that using so much essence was worth it. But Bayom thought otherwise and still resented his unfaithful master. Suddenly the whale returned and began to speed toward the shore. Our protagonist wondered why it had returned. The World Eater jumped out of the water right in front of them to enthusiastic cheers, showering them all with spray. You thought he was just playing around and fooling around, and of course getting Bayom wet once again. But as it turned out, it wasn't, and he was surprised to find a gift at his feet. A bunch of seafood for every taste. That was the World Eater's thanks. Yu happily asked if he was really going to give it all to him, and the whale waved his head affirmatively. And while our protagonist was thanking the whale for the gift and promising to enjoy it, Bayom and Pterodrones were already taking everything for their own use. Finally, they said goodbye, and having received the fish, Bayom was more likable and had nothing against their acquaintance with the whale. Yu wished the World Eater to rejoin the sea in good health, and that their next encounter would be just as pleasant. Just a few hours later, there was breaking news in the real world. A huge sea monster had appeared on the coast. In the southern part of the coast of the Korean peninsula, and its vile tentacles were full of anger and desire to bring death and destruction. The military was preparing to meet the monster, and a dozen helicopters were patrolling the coastline fortified just for such occasions. But as soon as the monster suddenly appeared out of the water, all the helicopters were useless scrap metal that exploded in an instant. The giant octopus was moving resolutely towards the shore, and it seemed that neither the military nor the hunters could stop it. It was moving fast, very fast, heading straight for the residential neighborhoods of the city. In front of its massive tentacles, the military scattered in panic, trying to save their lives. They didn't understand why the hunters hadn't gotten here yet. So far, the monster had no trouble overcoming all obstacles. Suddenly, one of the lowers noticed another giant silhouette and immediately reported it to his terrified captain, who didn't understand what it was. It was a World Eater, and compared to him, the octopus looked small and insignificant. Looking at him, the military were shocked. His abnormal size left no doubt about the level of threat he was. The monster octopus realized that he was in trouble and instinctively began to move back into the sea, hoping to hide in the depths. But he failed, as the whale opened its mouth wide and sucked up that poor octopus along with hundreds of tons of water. He was still trying to grasp something with his tentacles, but it was useless. The bottomless jaws did not leave him a chance. A moment and the mouth slammed shut, and only one tentacle was still visible for a few seconds before it disappeared. After such a hearty meal, the World Eater turned around and swam back to the open sea. Kim Hyun-suk was watching closely, of course from the safety of his office. And he was quite surprised by the behavior of this monster, which just ate his fellow monster and returned to the sea. But after taking everything into consideration, he came to the conclusion that this giant whale was actually a demigod who had long ago made a contract with the first awakened hunter. His assistant confirmed all his guesses by saying that the description of the creature matched almost exactly the appearance of the demigods described in the records. However, they still needed to take a closer look at this case, especially in the context that according to reports that had started coming from Japan, the wandering sea monsters that were usually near the Korean peninsula had moved towards southern Japan. Kim Hyun-suk was confused and didn't understand what had started to happen in the world in the past few weeks, before it seemed that everything was clear and operated according to certain laws and reasons. But lately, everything had gone wrong, and he couldn't understand what or who was causing it, and he was annoyed. But Jiha had gotten better over the past few weeks and was quite happy. Hwang Sun-young brought a stack of old Estrom books that she had found at the bookstore, as more and more of them had been available recently. That couldn't have pleased our pair of bookworms. But our hero also had something to brag about, and he gave her the expanded map he'd been completing for the past few days. Hwang Sun-young happily took it to look at it, and wondered if it was a complete map of the Estrom Kingdom. But unfortunately, it was just an extension that covered the areas near the Tails River. Our hero explained that he had made it using information he had learned from the Night Troop Commander's logbook, so this map might not be perfect. But after looking at it, she marveled at how detailed and high quality it was. In fact, the fact that the map was so detailed was due to the Pterodrones who had personally visited all the places, but she shouldn't have known that. At the same time, Hwang Sun-young marveled at the fact that even the roads had been drawn. However, the map was not yet complete. In order to finish it, Jiha had to add the area south of the Tails River, and then he would have a complete map of the Estrom Kingdom at his disposal. Seeing so much interest in this kingdom, Hwang Sun-young wondered why he was working so hard to restore the map. It was already too much work for a normal hobby, and was more like some kind of obsession. The reason was simple. He wanted to help his acquaintance Seo Hyejin find someone. Han Seung-hyuk, who had disappeared without a trace a few years ago. But he's definitely alive, and wandering somewhere on the continent of Gehenna. Even though they found his armor and sword broken, there was still hope, and he was eager to solve the mystery behind his disappearance. And effectively using the abilities granted to our protagonist from the World Tree, he would definitely be able to find him and find out everything. Hwang Sun-young immediately realized what was going on in his own way. It must be the woman he liked, and her sly smile made you deny everything. They had a fun chat and had a good time together, but the girl was tired and was going to go home to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow early in the morning, she had to go on another quest, and our hero did not want to delay her. He advised her and her squad to go to his store tomorrow and stock up on potions, since she said it was a third-rank dungeon and they would need a lot of resistance potions. Yu was kind to her as always, and she thanked him for that. As she left, she jokingly asked him to tell her if he found a girl, and as usual, she clumsily hurried back to her house. Back in the store, he thought that thanks to her, he had been able to gather more information very quickly, and moreover discovered another rune word. Remembering the runes, he looked at the Book of Infinite Spells. He decided to use the newly learned rune to create a scroll of change, a scroll that allowed him to find a trace of any living creature and confirm its location. He plucked the finished scroll from the book thinking of Seo Hyejin, and her image appeared before his eyes, and especially her smile. Yu himself didn't expect the scroll to work so quickly, and his eyes widened in surprise. His consciousness flew across the infinity of space and darkness, among which one star shone brightest. The closer he got to it, the brighter it glowed. Until finally the image of Seo Hyejin walking somewhere appeared in it. The vision quickly passed, and Yu was quite pleased with the result. After all, he not only recognized her location, but also the amount of power and energy she had at the moment. This scroll was very useful and could come in very handy in the future. Suddenly Byum mewed and jumped on the table, demanding attention from his master. Yu took him in his arms and apologized that the place was so noisy and crowded lately, and Byum purred contentedly. Then our main character suggested that the cat go to their dream garden and have dinner. Of course he was delighted with the idea. When they fell asleep, they went into the garden, and the first thing that caught our hero's eye was how clean the water became, even cleaner than it was before. Was it all thanks to the World Eater? The water was so clear that he even managed to catch a small fish. But the changes didn't stop there. The level of the sun apples, as well as the other fruits, had risen to the third level, and now his potions were going to be even better. Yu went to greet the pterodrones that seemed to have gotten bigger, and their numbers had also increased. Our hero had to apologize for the delay. He was so busy reading old books that he forgot about everything else. But the pterodrones were not upset. They used the time to their advantage and were carrying the fruits of the World Tree. Yu immediately noticed that there were more of them than before. Everything was fine, and he praised his little helpers for a job well done. Pterodrone Knight suddenly flew up to our hero and started pulling his shirt up. Yu inquired what had happened. Was it something important? Pterodrone pointed to the top of the World Tree, and it looked like he was inviting our hero to climb up there. It was a sight to behold. Yu had never been known for his physical fitness, and using his own body was not his strong suit. And the tree was very tall. Yu tried his best to get to the highest branch with only a little bit left, and he finally made it. The view before him was astonishing, and he could see Mount Apido itself. This allowed him to make certain assumptions about the location of his garden. It meant that the continent of Gehenna was really outside the garden. Suddenly, Byum became anxious and looked down as if spotting an enemy. Yu misunderstood him and thought he was hungry and said he was going to go down and feed him right away. He just had to be patient. But there was one little problem. As you know, it's not hard to climb high, it's much harder to get down. Lots of cats fall into this trap, and people sometimes too. Yu was not one of those weaklings and gathered his will into a fist and started to descend. But not even halfway down, he felt something grab his leg. And then it tied him up completely. This evil plant resembled the monster from which the seed he had recently planted near Byum's tree had fallen out, and now it looked like he was going to have to pay for it. And seeing the plant's predatory grin, he even froze for a moment, to then scream at the weight of the forest. Begging the knight and Byum to save him, he shouted, "Save me!" Time after time, but there was no help. The plant monster also let out a frightening roar and seemed about to start devouring him with its hungry maw. But it only seemed, and there was no need to save anyone because the monster was friendly, and gently put our hero on the ground without causing him any harm. It seemed like everything that had happened before was just a misunderstanding and a play of Jiha's imagination. This plant was quite cute, and Byum didn't mind its company at all. But Yu still had some misgivings, so he awkwardly thanked the plant for helping him down. In the end, Jiha came to the conclusion that on second thought, this cute plant just liked to hug people and didn't want to hurt them. But the question remained whether it was worth publishing it on the mere wiki or not.